Walm drove his spear into the fallen enemy's throat, but didn't let his guard down. The fight wasn't over yet. Another wave of soldiers was already forming. This wasn't some modern war. It was a brutal clash of iron against iron. When the battle finally ended in victory, Walm didn't celebrate like the others. Instead, he felt a heavy guilt for those who had died. Nearby, his squad mates were gathered around a wounded enemy, the man barely clinging to life. They tried to end his suffering but failed to strike the vital spot, leaving him groaning in agony. With a sigh of frustration, Walm stepped forward, pushed them aside, drew his sword, and ended it cleanly. Walm wasn't from this world. He used to be a salaryman named Takakura Raizou. On his way to work one morning, he felt a sharp pain in his chest and collapsed. That day, his life as Takakura Raizou ended abruptly. But the man who took his second life in a strange new world is now known as Walm. While praying for the fallen, Walm was interrupted by his squadmate Jose, who told him it was time to regroup. On their way back to camp, Jose commended him for killing 9 enemies that day and said he must be proud. Walm only replied that there was nothing to be proud of. He didn't kill to raise his count. He killed because it was his job. When the state says kill, it's his duty to do so. He's simply fulfilling his role as a soldier. Jose mocked him for being too serious, and they left the battlefield for camp. That night, while Walm was eating rations, someone put an arm around his shoulder. It was their squad leader, Due. He was drunk, praising Walm for taking down 9 enemies, but bragging that he still won because he killed 15. Walm just played along, saying he could never beat the leader. Then someone cut into their conversation, saying the only reason Due won was because he had a skill. He added that magic was one thing, but skills were just a cheat. Jose introduced them, their new recruits, Burrito and Nor. The squad leader pointed at Burrito and said it wasn't a cheat, since it was his own power. The two started arguing. Nor then asked if it was true that the squad leader's skill could cut through any armor. Due grinned, flexed his muscles, and said it was true. Walm and Jose started talking about the difference between magic and skills. Jose said the squad leader's skill was no joke. He alone could turn the tide of war. He admitted he wanted a skill himself because it could make him rich, then asked Walm what he'd rather have, magic or a skill. Walm took a sip of liquor before answering that if he could get one for free, he'd choose magic. They both glanced at the bald magic user from their squad, and Walm said magic sure was something nice to dream about. Jose made a face and immediately called out to the squad leader, saying Walm had dreams now. Coming from a guy so serious he even used full force against a kid. The squad leader, worried, asked if Walm had hit his head or something, since that wasn't like him at all. Walm just closed his eyes and ignored the two as they kept talking. Later that night, the squad leader got serious and told the whole squad that from now on they'd be fighting non-stop battles, and starting tomorrow, their next opponent would be Myard. Today's battle was just the appetizer. Their real target was Myard, and all forces were ordered to gather at Saria City. From tomorrow on, they'd be marching to war again. It would be unlike anything they'd faced before. A massive battle. Due urged everyone to prepare themselves. Walm remembered when he was a new recruit on the battlefield. Back then, he'd hesitated to kill a soldier begging for mercy. While he hesitated, an enemy crept up behind him and nearly struck. But the squad leader and Jose saved him, yelling that it wasn't the time to daydream. That same voice now told him not to daydream again. They had arrived at Saria City. As they walked through the streets, Due told them they just had to wait until tomorrow. Jose invited Walm to drink with them. Along the way, Walm noticed a malnourished young woman selling herself on the street. Beggars and prostitutes filled the road, and Jose warned them to be careful. The woman grabbed Walm by the cloth and offered herself, but he refused. She looked down in despair. Seeing that, Walm took out his pouch and gave her some money for food. The woman teared up, thanked him, and ran into an alley. Jose told Walm not to feed them too much. If word got out, beggars would swarm him. He told him not to let his good nature get the best of him. Walm nodded and said he'd be careful next time. Jose was surprised. Despite Walm being so bloodthirsty in battle, he still had a soft side. He reminded him that no matter what, they were just soldiers. Seeing the poverty around him reminded Walm of when he first came to this world. His family couldn't survive on farming alone, which was why he became a soldier. Without that choice, his parents, siblings, and he would have ended up like the beggars in the streets. Due then told them about Saria City's history. It used to be a fertile land. 5 years ago, it was still part of the Konoha Kingdom, not Highserk territory. But Konoha began fortifying its borders and clashing with Highserk. At first, Due was surprised they even managed to win and defend a village. He remembered realizing that the beans he often ate were considered cattle feed here. This land had once been rich, with wide fields, good harvests, and plenty of food. Hosei asked what happened. Due explained that the Myard Grand Duke was a former Konoha noble who betrayed Konoha during the war, siding with the Ferrius Kingdom. The combined Ferrius and Myard armies crushed Konoha's lands, invading and burning everything in their path until the kingdom was ruined. The Grand Duke seized the territory, and Myard became an independent nation. The land turned desolate because the country had been sold out to its neighbors. The Highserk Empire delayed its counterattack for years due to a lack of troops. The hatred Konoha's people held for Myard and Ferrius ran deeper than their grudge against Highserk. Deep enough that they joined Highserk's side in the invasion of Myard. They arrived at the tavern, and Due told the two that the drinks would be on him tonight. They had a toast for the upcoming invasion war. Walm dipped his bread in the soup and was surprised at how delicious it was. He had thought he'd had enough bean soup for a lifetime, but tasting this changed his mind. The three of them drank happily until midnight. Walm, on the verge of vomiting, excused himself. When he was gone, Hosei told the squad leader that he's always like this before a war. Outside, leaning on the wall, Walm reflected on what he had done today. He felt conflicted and thought of himself as a hypocrite and a murderer. The next morning, the army gathered at the training hall. On the podium stood the commander of the invasion, Gerard Berger. He hyped the army, calling them the symbol of bravery of their empire. With this bravery, he said, they would finally end the 5-year war. He told them not to be afraid to trample their enemies and to show them who they declared war against. With a loud roar, he screamed, "Kill them all!" The army cheered, raising their weapons. Walm thought about how he would be killing again, but quickly reminded himself that it's kill or be killed. Hosei asked why he looked so pale, but Walm replied that it was just a hangover. Hosei, worried, told him that if something was bothering him, he was happy to listen. The Empire's army then departed from Saria City and was divided into 3 large troops. All routes leading to Myard territory were targeted for capture, particularly the huge fort that blocked the main road, guarded by 3,000 soldiers. Due's squad was assigned to that fort, Saria's paramount fort. Due gathered everyone and gave directions. While Walm was smoking by a tree, Hosei grabbed Burrito's balls to ease the tension. He then went close to Noor, but Walm stepped forward and warned him that he would not tolerate any form of brutality against women. Hosei then told the 2 recruits that this would be their first real castle siege. They would be thrown onto the front lines, and newcomers could easily die in hand-to-hand combat. But he assured them that if an enemy came, Walm would handle it. He said Walm was a professional who could kill dozens with a plain expression. Walm told Hosei not to portray him as some battle maniac, though he didn't want to see newcomers die either. Noor still couldn't help but feel nervous, but decided to trust Walm anyway. Moments later, the war horn sounded. The battle had begun. Due slapped Walm on the back and tried to motivate him. The army started marching toward the castle wall. The soldiers held large shields big enough to cover several people, while also carrying sacks of dirt. The enemy fired volleys of arrows at them, and one arrow in particular was far stronger than the others. It decimated a soldier's head. Due warned everyone that the enemy had a skill user who used hard shoot. Walm cursed the situation and told Noor to stay close to the shield if she wanted to live. The soldiers hurried toward the wall, but as they got closer, the enemy began bombarding them with different kinds of magic. While holding the shield, Walm cracked a joke to lift morale. Surprisingly, it worked. Due, pissed off, hurled a large rock that hit the skill user in the head. He then ordered everyone to quickly surround the wall. They immediately piled up the soil they carried to reach the rampart, some even using earth magic to speed up the process. Noor told Walm that the walls hadn't been surrounded yet and asked if they were still going to climb. But then, an order came from the battalion commander, an all-out attack to break through the walls. They set up ladders, and the soldiers charged, climbing toward their deaths. Walm told Noor to stay close, but as the soldiers reached the top, the enemy greeted them with spears. One soldier aimed his bow at Walm, but Willer, the bald magic user, covered for him, launching an ice spike into the enemy's face. When Walm finally reached the top, he swung his sword, killing one enemy instantly. Shock spread among the soldiers. He quickly moved to another opponent, who deflected his attack and tried to counter, but Walm blocked it with his shield and stabbed the soldier in the face. The man fell and screamed, terrifying the enemies around him. Then he heard Noor call for help. She was about to be killed by a knight wielding a halberd. Walm acted fast and threw his shield, but the knight cut it in two. Walm was surrounded, but he still taunted the knight, saying he was only good against new recruits. The bait worked, and the knight charged at him. Walm barely dodged the attack and tried to counter, but his strike didn't even leave a dent in the knight's armor. The knight grazed Walm's arm, drawing blood. Walm knew that if he took too long, the knight would kill Noor. Normally, someone like this would be fighting their squad leader, but Due couldn't reach the rampart because of the chaos below. Walm had no choice but to take down the knight himself. Before he could plan, the knight charged again. Walm dodged, took a deep breath, and readied his stance. He rushed forward, but because of the knight's longer reach, Walm was wounded in the shoulder. The knight followed with another stab, grazing Walm's cheek. The knight sensed something strange. His halberd should have hit Walm's eye, but it missed. Then he saw a faint magical barrier surrounding Walm. Power surged through Walm's body, and his sword suddenly felt light. The knight charged again, but Walm met his attack head-on, with slashing through the knight's shield and arm in one blow. The knight could only ask why Walm was laughing maniacally as he fell. The enemy soldiers froze in fear. They had just watched an ordinary soldier defeat their commander. A large explosion erupted behind them. Due's squad had broken through. The enemy's morale collapsed, and now they were being surrounded. Walm ran to Noor, asked if she was okay, and checked her wound. Seeing it wasn't deep, he told her to be careful, since the battle wasn't over yet. Walm took a shield from a corpse and rejoined Due's squad. He charged into the enemy lines, cutting through them easily. He couldn't help but test his newfound power. After the enemies on the rampart were massacred, Due and Jose commended Walm, glad that he had gained a skill. Jose told Walm to rest and leave the rest to them. Noor called out to him and thanked him for saving her. She said she could return to the front lines again. Walm smiled, just happy she was safe. Later, Walm sat down and sighed in relief that he made it out alive. He rested, surrounded by corpses. Shortly after, the fort surrendered. The battle that began in the morning ended just before sunset, and yet, this was only the outpost at the border. Walm's job was far from over. A few days later, Due's squad found themselves deep in the forest investigating an attack on their supply line. The attackers reportedly had 2 magic users with them. Noor asked if what she was seeing was also caused by magic. Before them lay the corpse of a Highserk soldier, half of his face crushed. It had been a few days since the siege. Some enemy troops had managed to escape and started waging guerrilla warfare along the forest roads. The Highserk army on its way to the Myard capital was forced to halt, suffering heavy losses in both supplies and soldiers. Walm studied the corpse and knew right away it wasn't done with a halberd. Due told him it was caused by a shield. That meant the person responsible had a skill. Due explained it could be someone with the iron wall skill. With that, even a wooden shield could hit like solid iron. If you got struck by it, you'd end up like this poor guy. Walm grew uneasy. They'd be facing both a magic user and a skill user. And Myard was clearly willing to use people like that in their ambushes. Jose added that an entire company had already gone out to find them, but they just lost 30 men instead. The enemy should have been defeated by now, but they were stubborn. As they walked, Walm lit a cigarette. Blowing out a puff of smoke, he asked Jose if the smell of tobacco could give them away. Jose just laughed and said their stench was probably stronger than the smoke anyway. Burrito joked that maybe they should wear perfume instead. Due laughed and told him to wear a skirt too. Maybe the enemy would show up faster. Walm couldn't help but smile at their banter. Then Noor pointed at something ahead. "What's that?" she asked. It was a decomposing corpse hanging from a tree. Jose told her those were forest people who'd sold information to the Myard troops. Noor wavered at the sight, disturbed by the brutality. Walm told her about his rookie days, how he also wasn't used to seeing things like this. That changed when dozens of his friends were killed by people just like them. Still, Noor couldn't help but feel bad. Walm just sighed and took another drag from his cigarette. Burrito asked if they'd get to keep the loot once they wiped out the enemies who attacked the caravan. Jose told him it wouldn't be easy. It'd be like fighting both Due and Walm at once. As they kept joking around, a loud explosion suddenly echoed nearby, snapping everyone to attention. Walm crushed his cigarette and readied his halberd. Jose shouted that the enemy was about 300 meters away. Due ordered everyone to attack from the right and flank them. The squad dashed toward the explosion and caught the enemy soldiers off guard. Walm struck first, cleaving one soldier's head in half with his halberd, then lunged at another and stabbed him in the neck. Jose, while fighting, noticed something and shouted that the enemy troops were being led by adventurers. Adventurers, people who fought demons and cleared dungeons, were far better equipped than normal soldiers. No wonder the Myard troops were so skilled at guerrilla tactics. Now, only the elite knights remained. Due faced off against an adventurer with the Iron Wall skill. He asked why the guild was interfering in the war when they had declared neutrality. The shield-bearing adventurer answered that they joined of their own free will. Meanwhile, Walm sensed something coming and instinctively dodged, a wind blade from a magic user. He spotted her, a kid, one of the adventurers. He hesitated for a moment but then steeled himself. Magic users were too dangerous to let live. He charged forward, cutting down two enemy soldiers who tried to stop him, slicing the arms off one and stabbing the other in the back. The second soldier fell, begging for help from the adventurer, but Walm told him to give up. No one was coming. Then he finished him off. The magic user stood frozen, horrified. "How can you kill so easily?" she asked. Walm paused, glancing down at a Highserk corpse near her feet. He scoffed. "On the battlefield, you do what you have to. I'm sure you've killed your share too." He readied his halberd. The girl, on the verge of tears, sent another wind blade his way. Walm slid under it and countered, swinging his halberd down, but she raised her shield in time. It didn't matter. Using his skill, Walm split her shield in two and slashed her arm. She fell to the ground, trembling. He walked toward her slowly as she struggled to get up. "Just give up already," he said. Terrified, she lashed out wildly, backing away until she tripped over a corpse. Walm disarmed her easily and mocked her to at least remember where are the corpses she killed. With no weapon left, she squeezed her eyes shut as he raised his halberd to finish her. But something made his instincts scream. Walm spun and blocked an incoming strike just in time, barely saving himself. He leapt back and clicked his tongue. It was another adventurer, a man named L. He shouted for the girl to stay back. That's when Walm realized the girl was actually their leader. Walm sighed, muttering that he hated this, then lunged at L. The man dodged and slipped behind him, using wind magic to boost his movement. Walm caught on fast. This guy was using body acceleration magic. They clashed, steel against steel. Walm smirked. "You sure you want me as your opponent?" he taunted. Walm's rage bait worked. While they traded blows, the other adventurers struggling against his squad. Due had nearly overpowered the Iron Wall user. L tried to finish their fight quickly so he could help his friends, but Walm had already adapted to his movements and dodged everything with ease. Then the adventurer's leader yelled for the others to evade. Willard's fireball hit, burning a bow-wielding adventurer. L screamed her name, enraged, and attacked Walm again, calling him a monster. Walm sneered. "You're no different. You kill too." Enraged again, L struck wildly. Walm parried and stabbed him in the shoulder, pinning him against a tree. Drawing his short sword, Walm prepared to finish him. The girl couldn't believe what was happening. In the blink of an eye, her friends were about to die. In panic, the girl unleashed another wind blade, far stronger than before. Walm stepped back just in time. The tree behind him shattered in half, and his arm was shredded with cuts. He froze. Her magic blade was hidden. Sweating, Walm saw her eyes, filled with killing intent. She fired again, her magic output spiking off the charts. Walm dove aside, but several Highserk soldiers weren't so lucky. They were sliced apart instantly. Dewey shouted for everyone to scatter. The forest was torn apart by her magic. When the storm of wind finally died down, Walm crawled out from cover. The adventurers were gone. Dewey told them not to pursue. The remaining enemy troops had been wiped out, and they would resume their march toward the Myard capital. Walm looked down at his wounded arm, reflecting on the battle. The adventurers were skilled. If they'd been used to killing, his squad would have been the one dead. He remembered the girl's words and muttered quietly, "I don't kill because I want to." Elsewhere in the forest, the girl fled, crying, haunted by Walm's words and the look in his eyes. A few days later, Dewey's squad found themselves resting by the river. Willard walked over to Walm and told him to grab his hand. The request caught Walm off guard. Willard explained that he'd heard Walm was interested in magic, and since they had time to spare, it was the perfect moment to learn, and he'd be the one to teach him. Walm's eyes lit up. He eagerly took Willard's hand, saying he wanted to learn. While they held hands, Noor asked Jose what they were doing. Jose explained that Willard was transferring magical energy to Walm to see if he had any aptitude for magic. If he did, he might one day be able to cast fireballs or water spears like Willard. With a grin, Jose decided to tease them, calling the pair a gay couple. Walm shot him a murderous glare, and Jose quickly said he was joking. Willard, annoyed, told Walm to focus. Walm concentrated and felt a cold sensation spreading through his hand. Willard said it was normal and told him to stay conscious and focused. Then he told Walm to let go of his hand, focus on his palms, and picture something that flows. A river, an ocean, anything. Walm imagined rain, and water began to form in his hands. Excited, he showed it to Willard, only for Willard to click his tongue and say it wasn't very good. Still, he admitted it was a usable amount, enough for a human well. When Walm looked around, he noticed the entire squad watching them. Dewey announced proudly that they now had 2 human wells. Walm broke into a sweat at the thought of producing water for everyone. Willard warned him to be careful using his magic. If he wasn't, he might end up draining himself dry. He also explained that compared to his own skill-based magic, water magic used far less mana. Walm was shocked. He hadn't realized he'd been using magic all along. Willard explained that both magic and skills rely on magical power. Elemental spells like fireballs and water spears are considered magic because they draw mana directly, while techniques like power attack or iron wall use mana to strengthen the body or weapon. Those are called skills. Willard was baffled that Walm didn't know this, but Walm told him he'd grown up as an illiterate farmer under military rule. Willard ignored it, then said it was time to test his fire aptitude. Walm closed his eyes to concentrate, but the sounds of his squad mates splashing nearby made it hard to focus. Willard noticed too late that the fire forming in Walm's palm was growing rapidly. Panic spread. Walm asked what he should do as the squad backed away in fear. Convinced he was about to burn the camp down, Burrito's mohawk suddenly caught fire, and Noor shoved him into the river to put it out, begging for mercy. Walm swore it wasn't on purpose, but Willard was already approaching menacingly. A huge water orb formed in Willard's hand and slammed into Walm, launching him 12 feet before he crashed into the river. Soaked and fuming, Walm shouted that what Willard threw was no joke, but Willard ignored him and pulled him out. With a wild look in his eyes, Willard said they would continue the aptitude test. Walm shrieked out of fear, but eventually found that he had a strong affinity for wind and a weak one for earth. Moments later, a messenger from the Allied troops arrived with orders from the Ligurian captain. The plan, he said, was insane. Dewey's squad would merge with the main battalion and face the Myard and Ferrius army on the plains of Reref. Meanwhile, in the Ferrius camp, commanders were busy planning their next move. Both the Myard and Ferrius strongholds stood on separate hills, giving each side a strong defensive position. One of the advisors explained that, judging from the Highserk army's formation, They were likely aiming to strike the Myard stronghold first, while sending a smaller force to pin down the Ferrius troops, everything unfolding just as predicted. The Lord of Ferrius, Winston, found it hard to believe that only a small number of Highserk soldiers could hold back his 6,000 men. Leaving his tent, he studied the enemy's positioning through the haze of campfire smoke and saw no clear weaknesses. He decided to let the Myard and Highserk forces wear each other down before sending his own troops in to finish off whoever was left. Even Highserk's famed Jeff Cavalry Battalion would fall once exhausted. He raised the morale of his soldiers, calling on them to fight with pride and emerge victorious for their king. Soon after, the Highserk army began to move. The combined forces of Myard and Ferrius numbered 25,000, facing 15,000 Highserk troops. The war horn sounded. Due's squad remained on standby. Watching the Myard soldiers bracing for battle, Jose commented that they looked unusually fierce today, probably because they were on home court advantage. Due agreed, adding that Myard must have called for Ferrius to deal with the Highserk threat directly. Nor, confused, asked why they were still waiting when the battle had already begun. Walm glanced at Due and noticed him sweating, which made him uneasy. Due finally explained the plan. First, the Highserk army would attack the Myard stronghold. While that unfolded, the deciding move would take place. The Ligurian battalion, including Due's squad, would charge together with just cavalry battalion. Walm was stunned. Even Jose, usually the joker, turned serious, saying that a cavalry and infantry charge side by side was reckless. He asked why their unit was chosen for such a suicide run. Due replied that it was because the Ligurian battalion had the most combat experience. Burrito, terrified, asked if things were really that bad. Due told him straight, it was. They would be running alongside horses, and if their hearts pounded or their legs gave out, they couldn't stop, because if they did, the soldiers behind would trample them. In short, if you stop, you die. And even while running, you'd still have to kill whoever stood in front of you. Due added that their squad was placed on the front line because of Walm's rampage back at the fort. Walm was taken aback and protested, saying Due rampaged more often than him, which made Due look away awkwardly. Jose tried to lighten the mood, saying it couldn't be helped. Their squad had 2 skill users, and Willert's magic on top of that. Due sighed, remembering the meeting with the commander, who'd told him, "I'm expecting a lot from you." Walm turned to look at the cavalry, and wondered if they could really keep up with them. The thought of surviving such a charge felt impossible. As he worried, Due muttered that the attack orders still hadn't arrived, and wondered if something had gone wrong with the vanguard. Maybe the plan wasn't unfolding as intended. That only made Walm more anxious. Due quickly tried to reassure everyone, saying there was no way Commander Berger would misread the situation. Then, from a distance, they saw it. The main Ferrius army charging down toward the battlefield, mowing through the vanguard lines. Burrito started to panic, and Noor shouted for new orders. Things grew even worse when the Myard reserve forces began charging from the hill, turning the situation grim. Finally, the attack order arrived, but to their shock, the target was the Ferrius stronghold instead of the Myard one. Confusion swept through the ranks. This wasn't what the plan called for. Before they could question it, Jeff's cavalry battalion had already taken off, thundering toward the Ferrius stronghold. The soldiers had no choice but to follow. Walm closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and steeled himself, then started running, joining the suicide run. While running, Walm was panting hard, surrounded by the sounds of crashing steel and splattering blood. Infantry charged alongside the cavalry. It was chaos. They had to keep running, fighting enemies in front of them without breaking stride. Walm lunged at an enemy soldier ahead, driving his halberd through the man's chest. His body wobbled from fatigue, but he forced himself to keep moving. They were now heading up the hill toward the Ferrius stronghold. As they ran, Due shouted over the noise that he finally understood the plan. The Highserk army had pretended to falter on purpose, baiting the enemy to attack there. The original plan, they'd been told, was just a bluff, a trap. Their allies had been used as decoys, drawing most of the enemy into a fight with Highserk's main force, leaving the Ferrius headquarters with far fewer defenders. Their real mission was now clear: destroy the Ferrius command before the Highserk main army collapsed. Victory depended on it. But the climb up the hill wasn't smooth. Even with fewer soldiers defending it, the slope was littered with spear walls and horse barricades. Due ordered Walm and Willard to use their magic. Flames flared in their palms. Fireballs hurled forward, exploding across the barricades and tearing open a gap in the enemy's line. With the defenses blown apart, the guards at the front were overwhelmed and cut down. Due's squad then rushed to push aside the anti-cavalry fences blocking the path. Using every bit of strength they had left, they toppled the barriers, just as Jeff's cavalry battalion came charging from the distance. Jose immediately shouted for everyone to clear the way before they were trampled. The soldiers moved aside, and the cavalry thundered through, crushing the remaining defenders as they stormed toward the Ferrius headquarters. The infantry followed close behind. One Highserk soldier who fell and couldn't get up was trampled underfoot by the wave of men charging forward. Walm's throat burned dry from exhaustion. Due yelled over the roar of battle that this was still just the beginning. The enemies they'd fought so far were mixed with non-militia, but from here on, near the Ferrius stronghold, they'd be facing the main army, the real soldiers. Before Walm could respond, someone attacked him mid-sentence. He managed to block, but the strike was so strong it forced him back. The attacker, a mounted warrior clad in distinctive armor, cut down multiple soldiers in a single charge. Walm realized this wasn't a regular knight, it was one of the Ferrius royal guards. That meant the general had to be nearby. Walm tried to provoke him, and the guard took the bait, charging straight at him. Their weapons clashed, but the royal guard's strength was overwhelming. Walm barely dodged the next strike and stumbled back. The guard looked stunned that Walm had survived his attack. Meanwhile, Due's squad was locked in combat with other enemies. It felt endless. Jose shouted that a group on the left flank was retreating. Due glanced over and saw them. "That's the Ferrius general," he yelled, asking for anyone to back him up. But everyone was tied up in their own fights. The enemy soldiers were buying time for their general to escape. Due cursed, splitting another foe in half. Back on Walm's side, he met the royal guard's next strike with his skill, but it wasn't enough. The blow sent him flying 18 feet before he crashed hard into the ground. Somehow, he still stood back up, glaring at the royal guard with killing intent. He knew a simple fireball wouldn't work. These royal guards didn't fear death. As long as they held the hill, the squad wouldn't reach the enemy headquarters, and if the general escaped, they'd lose everything. Walm made up his mind. He'd burn it all. He started gathering every drop of mana he could, combining fire and wind. The enemy soldiers noticed and rushed him, but Due's squad stepped in to hold them off. Flames began to swirl around Walm, crackling and twisting. Jose shouted for everyone to fall back. The royal guard felt a chill run through him and charged in desperation. Willard yelled for Walm to do it. Walm released everything. A vortex of blue fire erupted around him, expanding outward in a roaring spiral. The royal guard's sword and horse melted in an instant, his armor fusing into his flesh as the heat consumed him. Everything around Walm turned to ash. Back in Winston's tent, one of his advisors urged him to flee. It was too dangerous to stay. If the general died, the entire army would fall apart, but Winston only called the man an idiot. He refused to abandon the stronghold. Before the advisor could argue, a wounded soldier stumbled into the tent, gasping that the anti-cavalry fence had been broken through. They had no choice but to move. As they rushed out, the tent collapsed behind them. Winston froze, shocked by what he saw. He remembered what his teacher once told him, that when blue fire appears, it's the bonfire to the netherworld. If you're invited, death is waiting. Ignis Fatus, he muttered. Latin for will-o'-the-wisp. There stood Walm alone, surrounded by a sea of blue flames consuming the entire camp. He muttered under his breath, "The next one is just for you." Winston steeled himself and faced Walm. He ridiculed the soldier's arrogance before revealing who he truly was, the commander of the Ferrius force. At first, Walm thought this must be a body double, but his glare coming from Winston erased all doubt. He told Winston to surrender. There was no point in killing him. A royal prisoner would be far more valuable to Highserk. But Winston shook his head. He still had his limbs, his sword, his pride, and his soldiers were still fighting. There was no reason for him to surrender. Winston charged forward, and Walm barely dodged the strike, gritting his teeth. He thought about what Winston had said, and realized the man meant every word. If Walm had been a second slower, that would have been a fatal blow. He had underestimated him. Winston wasn't just a noble with a title, he was a real commander, and strong at that. Walm was at a clear disadvantage. His body was worn down from the non-stop fighting, his mana almost gone after summoning the blue flames. He couldn't use skills or magic anymore. Every move he made was slower, heavier. Winston struck again, catching him off guard. Walm barely dodged and tried to counter with a stab, but Winston parried easily and slashed his arm. Blood ran down his sleeve. There was no opening. Desperate, Walm threw his halberd. Winston deflected it. In that instant of distraction, Walm rushed in, drawing the short sword at his waist. Winston tried to guard, but it was too late. The blade sliced halfway through his neck. Blood spurted as Winston collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. With his final strength, he murmured that though they had lost the battle, his kingdom had not fallen. A moment later, his eyes went still. Walm raised his voice, declaring the fall of the Ferrius commander. A roar erupted from the Highserk soldiers as enemy morale shattered. The Highserk troops charged forward, cutting down the fleeing men. Walm stood catching his breath. Nearby, one of Winston's advisors knelt beside the body, tears streaming down his face. Then, without hesitation, he drew his sword and slit his own throat. Walm could only stare, speechless at the grim sight. Soon after, the commander of Jeff's cavalry battalion arrived and confirmed the kill. Jeff commended Walm for his efforts and asked about his unit. Walm identified himself as a member of Kazuru platoon under Dewey's squad. Jeff placed a hand on his shoulder, promised he'd be rewarded handsomely, and advised him not to die before receiving it. Then he rode off with his cavalry to pursue the fleeing enemy. Jose soon found Walm, asking if he was still standing. Walm admitted he was utterly exhausted, and Jose told him that feeling tired was proof he was still alive. Walm asked about the others, and Jose assured him they were battered but alive. Moments later, their squad leader, Dewey, appeared, covered in cuts and bruises, but still wants to fight. Walm looked out across the battlefield, smoke rising, fire spreading, and bodies scattered everywhere. The victory over Ferrius and Myard had come at a terrible cost, but it marked the nearing end of the war. Meanwhile, on another hill, the Myard stronghold was surrounded. Its commander, a former Kanoan noble who had betrayed his homeland, saw there was no escape. He tried to surrender, but before he could, his guard was struck down. Soldiers of Saria, once his own countrymen now allied with Highserk, charged in, driven by vengeance. The foolish duke who sold out his own country, all he could whisper was, "I'm sorry." Spears pierced his body again and again, and when the rage subsided, his corpse was displayed on the battlefield. After the Highserk Empire defeated the allied forces of Myard and Ferrius, the army advanced to Edinburgh, the capital of Myard, on foot. Walm and his group were ordered to maintain peace and order in the city, but now the Dewey squad found themselves in the former Myard Duke's mansion. Burrito, worried, asked Jose what their squad leader Dewey did to get invited to such a residence. Jose replied that he didn't know, but he thought they didn't have any ulterior motives. Dewey heard all of it and asked everyone if they thought he made some mistake, to which they replied with "no," followed by a hesitant "probably." Walm, on the other hand, believed they would receive a reward for their huge accomplishment. A butler arrived and poured everyone tea. The squad was confused about how to drink it since such drinks were only enjoyed by royalty. Everyone tried their best to drink it with proper manners. Everyone except Willard, who didn't touch his tea at all. Walm was overjoyed to come across such a fine product in this world. He didn't know the manners of this world, but he still remembered those from his previous one. Walm drank the tea elegantly, which left the whole squad confused. He was on the verge of tears from experiencing such a refined taste after so many years. The squad called Walm a son of a bitch, annoyed by his smirk. They thought he was trying to embarrass them with his refined manners. Nor even asked Walm if he was sure he was just a farmer. Then the door suddenly opened, and their commander, Gerald Berger, finally arrived. The whole squad stood up to greet him, but the commander told them to take a seat since they couldn't have a conversation standing up. Commander Berger was a war hero of the Highserk Empire. After taking a sip of his tea, the commander told the squad that he was surprised to hear it wasn't the Jeff cavalry that killed Winston, but rather an infantry unit from Duai's squad. He commended them all and said that was why they had been called there, to be rewarded directly. Duai used formal language with the commander, leaving the entire squad speechless. The commander praised Duai, calling him a treasure of their country, then turned his attention to Walm, catching him off guard. He listed Walm's history. 6 months after joining the battalion, he had trained in battles near the border. Walm was a powerful weapon for his squad leader and had even learned magic from Willert and later developed Ignis Fatuus, an excellent talent, the commander said. Walm lowered his head and thanked the commander. The commander said he was glad Walm was a soldier of Highserk. Anyone else would have been burned and killed by that blue fire. Everyone had heard the fairy tales of the fire that sent people to the netherworld. Throughout history, those who possessed that ability were either famous heroes or outstanding adventurers. The commander wondered if Walm was the same. He then told his assistant to bring the thing. It was a demon mask, familiar to Walm since it looked like something from his former world. The commander explained that the mask was originally worn by a group of otherworlders who went on a rampage against the 3 major nations. There were many mysteries surrounding the mask, but the original owner could also use Ignis Fatuus, just like Walm. The commander told Walm to try it on. "Splendid," he said. "The mask suits you perfectly." Walm felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if he could feel a connection to his original world. The commander told him that all his enemies would fear the mask. After Walm removed it, the mask started vibrating violently, startling him and the squad, while the commander only laughed, nor quickly pointed out that the mask was cursed. Walm, worried, asked the laughing commander, but the commander only replied that there was no need to worry. The mask had simply taken a liking to him. He continued, explaining that the mask sometimes harmonized with emotions and trembled, but it hadn't caused any harm yet, so Walm shouldn't be concerned. With a more serious expression, the commander said there were rare cases of weapons developing a will of their own, and this mask was a particularly picky one. It was good that it had finally found a suitable owner. As the squad was leaving and walking down the hallway, Jose asked Walm what he would do with the mask. Walm replied that since he had received it from the commander, he would cherish it. Noor, shocked, asked why he wasn't going to throw it away, and the mask immediately started vibrating again. Duai and Jose, scared, quickly scolded Noor, who hastily apologized to the mask. It stopped vibrating. The mask truly did have a will of its own. After all, this was a world filled with skills and magic. Outside the mansion, Noor pointed out the mountain of Myard soldiers' corpses. Jose replied that all of them had rushed to this place. To soldiers who had lost their lord, this must have seemed like a treasure trove. He added, more serious than usual, that even with wealth and power, everything can crumble in an instant. Walm, however, still thought it was pathetic to die just to get hold of some wealth. Duai shared the same sentiment, believing loyalty had driven them to their deaths. According to the servants who survived, insurgents had killed the Myard kin before the Highserk army arrived. As the squad walked through the streets, Walm noticed that the death toll was still rising. Edinburgh was under martial law. Walm and his group were ordered to maintain public order, which included finding Myard soldiers hiding in the city, arresting those who disobeyed martial law or looted, and disposing of them to ensure smooth operations. One civilian was dragged in front of his family, begging that he wasn't a soldier, but a Highserk soldier called his bluff, pointing out a fresh arrow wound on his back. The man was dragged away and would be forced to work for a few months. Walm wondered if he really was a soldier, but kept walking until Burrito heard the sound of a struggle nearby. When they went to investigate, Walm's eyes widened. Some Highserk soldiers had broken into a house, assaulted the woman inside, and beaten her husband to death. The rampaging soldiers were soon restrained by others. Walm asked what would happen to them. A high-ranking officer replied that normally the crime would mean decapitation, But since they had just won the war, they'd probably only be whipped. Walm couldn't contain his anger and asked if the officer really thought being whipped was enough punishment. Due intervened, saying that getting whipped was far from easy, catching Walm off guard. He continued, explaining that soldiers scream from the first lash. By the second and third, they start crying. Their skin peels, their flesh tears. Even if they piss themselves or pass out, they wake up for the next lash. Due's words terrified the assaulters, making them sweat profusely, but he only continued to stare at them. Walm calmed down after hearing him. The officer told the offenders to take the squad leader's advice, and if they wanted their lashes reduced, they should quietly stand up and turn themselves in. Due placed a hand on Walm's shoulder and walked away. Walm could only look down. Later that night, the Due squad camped near a river. It was late and Walm sat alone, smoking, drinking, and eating by himself. He watched the two moons above, a clear reminder that he was in another world. As he started to feel sleepy, he heard a sound from the nearby inland port. He quickly went there and called out to ask who was there. When there was no answer, Walm unsheathed his sword, preparing himself in case it was a Myard straggler who had escaped from Edinburgh. He called out again, and two figures finally emerged, an old man and a young woman. Walm asked who they were since they weren't Highserk soldiers. It was dark, so he conjured fire in his palm to illuminate their faces. The old man explained that they were leaving because the city was filled with thieves and ruffians, and they could no longer live there. They just wanted to seek refuge with relatives abroad. Walm examined them. They did look like civilians, but he still had doubts. He asked the old man if he had any military background. The old man replied that he had been involved in a war 10 years ago, but was now just a retiree. Walm didn't believe him, noting that his physical condition was too good for his age. His back should have been bent by now, and that the young lady's hands were too soft for someone who worked for a living. He suspected they were a noble and a knight in disguise. Walm looked the old man straight in the eyes. The old man's gaze was still sharp. The mood grew tense until they heard a low growl. It came from the young lady's stomach. Her face flushed red with embarrassment. Walm, caught off guard, couldn't help but laugh. He apologized, saying he just couldn't help it. It was too cute. He warned the young lady that if she was that pretty, she might get kidnapped by bad soldiers, then told them that when their home was safe, they should return. He would let them go this time. As they began to walk away, Walm called them back, making the old man tense. But Walm only wanted to give them his leftover food since the young lady was hungry. The two were shocked. Walm explained that he'd had a rough day and was only doing it to lessen his guilt, calling himself a hypocrite. The young lady accepted the food and thanked him. As Walm continued to smoke, he watched them board a boat and disappear into the distance. Walm didn't know it yet, but letting them go would haunt him for the rest of his life. Later, the old man and young lady arrived at their destination. The young lady broke down crying, saying that her father, mother, everyone was dead, blaming herself for doing nothing but cry. The old man, named Kelta, comforted her, telling Rita, the young lady, that there were still things ahead of them, and they would take back their land. It was revealed that Rita was the daughter of the Duke of Myard, the one who had been speared to death, in case anyone had forgotten. 2 months later, Due was yelling like crazy alongside the other soldiers, all of them shouting and making noise in front of a castle. The soldiers continued to make noise, striking their shields with their swords and even sounding horns. The enemy atop the castle walls couldn't stand the clamor. Due ordered everyone to get louder. The enemies grew more frustrated each day, but they couldn't retaliate, as the Highserk army remained out of arrow range. After each noisy display, the soldiers returned to their camp. Following the siege of Myard's capital, Edinburgh, the Highserk army marched straight toward Ferrius. Because Ferrius had supported Myard's forces in the recent war, their border defenses were now severely weakened, and Highserk wasn't about to overlook such a vulnerability. The army split into 2 groups. The first consisted of 4 battalions ordered to invade the inland district, while the second, made up of 2 battalions, surrounded the Ferrius forces to prevent the main body from being flanked. Walm, part of the Ligurian battalion, belonged to the second group. Their target was the Refin mine near the border. When Burrito asked when they had become a choir, Due laughed and said it was because they were seizing the mines. They had cornered about 3,000 Ferrius soldiers inside their forts, which now formed multiple defensive lines. To make matters worse, the enemy held the high ground. Taking even one fort would demand immense effort, and it might not even be worth it. That's why the Highserk soldiers repeatedly launched harassing fire, forcing the defenders back to their forts. First, they'd break their spirit, then they'd attack and finish the job. Burrito joked that the enemies were asking for an encore, and the soldiers laughed as insults rained down from the walls. In short, they were waiting for the enemy to starve out. Walm couldn't help but enjoy this operation. Compared to their previous battles, it felt almost relaxing. 2 weeks later, the choir had become routine. With so much free time, Due ordered everyone to train. Inside an abandoned mining tunnel, Walm practiced under Willard's supervision. Because he couldn't control his magic properly, there was always a risk of harming allies. His Ignis Fatuus wasn't normal. In the worst case, it could incinerate an entire platoon. Willard said the abandoned tunnel was perfect for practicing control. Walm sat inside while Willard waited outside, watching. As Walm tried to recreate the sensation from before, the tunnel was suddenly engulfed in blue fire. The flames were so intense that even Willard, standing outside, barely dodged the burst. Meanwhile, Due was training Noor and Burrito in a 2-versus-1 match. He easily blocked Burrito's attack, then disarmed Noor with a quick move while still fending off Burrito. Grabbing Burrito by the collar, he threw him into Noor, knocking them both down. When Burrito got back up, his mohawk stood out like a target, so Due smacked it, splitting it perfectly in two. Noor, still on the ground, burst out laughing. Grinding his teeth, Burrito charged again, this time filled with rage. Due met him with the back of his fist, sending Burrito spinning like a windmill before crashing to the ground. The entire squad broke into laughter at the sight. A few days later, Walm managed to gain partial control over Ignis Fatuus, but a new problem appeared. He could only sustain it for 30 seconds. If he went beyond 40, his mana would run dry. When that happened, he couldn't use his skills or even basic fireballs, and his physical abilities would plummet. If he pushed too far, it could kill him. As the fire died down, Jose entered the tunnel to check on Walm's condition. Walm, crawling on the ground, handed him a cooked chicken and joked that he was just worried about the food. He had apparently become the squad's portable stove, using his fire to cook meals. He didn't mind, though. The food was good. When Walm and Jose brought the food outside, the aroma drifted through the air, making everyone hungry. Jose claimed it was part of their plan. The smell would crush enemy morale. Walm doubted that, saying everyone just wanted to eat their fill. Jose grinned and handed him a piece of chicken, saying bland food had no place on the battlefield. Walm took a bite, immediately changing his mind, but still tried to deny it, claiming Ignis Fatuus had drained his mana and he only needed the calories. Deep down, though, he enjoyed it. As they ate, Jose said this peaceful routine wouldn't last much longer. He glanced around before explaining that more enemy soldiers had been fleeing recently. They couldn't bear confinement any longer, so many were surrendering. Walm joked that their daily choir must have done the trick. But Jose argued the cooking smells probably played a part too. Walm found that hard to believe, but Jose just laughed. He told Walm to imagine being a Ferrius soldier, trapped inside the walls, surrounded day and night by the enemy, rationing the last of your food while hearing the Highserk troops outside feasting on fresh meals. The sound alone would drive anyone mad. Hearing that made Walm uneasy. Jose smiled faintly and told him to enjoy what little peace they had left. Walm couldn't help but look up to him, realizing he still had much to learn. 3 days later, blue flames engulfed the fortress. The Ferrius soldiers panicked, thinking the Highserk troops had infiltrated. As they rushed to extinguish the fire, Walm stood atop the walls, wearing his Oni mask, watching the scene unfold below. Inside the tent before the attack, the tactician explained that the mine's geographical location was difficult. Aside from that, it was also fortified, and because the terrain was narrow, deploying soldiers would be tough. That meant they couldn't overwhelm the enemy with numbers. That's where Walm would come into play. He was tasked with leading a night raid with a small unit, using Ignis Fatuus to cause total chaos within the castle walls. Walm would be accompanied by a wind element magic user, and together they'd create enough disturbance for the 2nd Battalion to take the fort in one go. After the briefing, the tactician asked if anyone had questions. Walm was devastated that he had suddenly become so important for this mission, and even thought they saw him as some kind of pyromaniac, but he couldn't refuse orders. Later that night, Walm and the others wore black cloaks to blend with the shadows as they crawled toward one of the fort's walls. Their mission was simple: infiltrate the area and create an opening so their allies could storm the place. Walm steeled himself and put on his Oni mask. As they rushed toward the wall, he remembered his training with Willard. Since Walm had a high affinity with both fire and wind elements, Willard had taught him how to use wind magic to jump higher. Walm and his group used that technique, catching a night patrol off guard. One of the soldiers screamed, but Walm immediately cut his head off. 2 more soldiers saw what happened, but his teammates quickly took them down. They rushed toward the defensive tower. Inside, Walm found a group of soldiers resting at a table. Walm was terrible at stealth missions, so he had no choice but to brute force his way through. He unleashed Ignis Fatuus toward the soldiers, engulfing them in blue flames. Their screams echoed as they burned, not just from the outside, but from the inside as well. Witnessing the horror, Walm averted his gaze. The noise drew the attention of the guards above, who rushed to investigate, only for the platform they stood on to explode. They caught fire and fell 30 feet to the ground. Ferrius finally sounded the alarm as their men scrambled to their positions. What they saw next shocked them. The stone defensive tower was burning, and stones weren't supposed to burn. Arrows then rained down from above. They came from the Highserk soldiers who had entered with Walm and taken a higher position. Walm was catching his breath when one of his teammates ran up, telling him they had the area covered. The enemies were approaching from below, so they had to hurry before reinforcements arrived from the other tower. Seizing this tower had been the hard part. Now they just had to hold out until the main force arrived. Walm was ordered to set ablaze the passage leading there so no one could cross. As he went back to the burned area, he saw the soldiers he'd incinerated. The memory of their screams came rushing back. Walm grabbed at himself, racked with guilt. The morals and conscience he carried from his previous life had been shattered. He realized, just like in Edinburgh, how much suffering his Ignis Fatuus had caused before death even came. If this wasn't his second life, if he had been born in this world originally, maybe he wouldn't be suffering right now. But he forced himself to stop thinking about it and carried out his orders. Walm burned down the passage. The blue flames spread quickly, forcing the enemy soldiers to retreat. It was hell. They couldn't extinguish the fire without risking being caught in it themselves. They were forced to watch their comrades burn alive. As Walm walked through the tower, he counted the soldiers he'd killed. His count reached 31 before he collapsed to his knees, nearly out of magic. At least no one else was coming. He closed his eyes as the blue flames consumed the tower. Then he heard a loud thud. 3 soldiers had forced their way through the heat and stood before him. They demanded to know if he was the one who caused the fire. Drawing their swords, they sarcastically thanked Walm for their daily chanting, day and night, and for letting them smell their dog food. Walm only laughed and apologized to them, saying that today would be the day their service ended. The 3 soldiers scattered in case Walm used his Ignis Fatuus, but they didn't know that Walm was at his limit. He hardly had any magic left. The 3 of them rushed at Walm, so Walm used his skill to attack the soldier with a nose scar, but the soldier blocked it easily and began to counter. Walm dodged and stepped back, but the soldier with the receding hairline and the magic user weren't letting him rest. The one with the hairline lunged at him while the other, at the back, cast water magic. Walm knew he would die there, so he mustered all his strength to use Ignis Fatuus to burn the soldiers, but the one with the shield pushed through the flames and attacked. Walm barely dodged, but water bullets came flying from the mage, so he fired a fireball to intercept them, filling the room with thick mist. While hiding in the mist, Walm analyzed his enemies. The one with the nose scar was skilled at strengthening his body with magic. The one with the receding hairline was a fire element user who specialized in fire resistance, and the mage was a water element user who protected the others from flames. Realizing this, Walm burst out of the mist and lunged at the one with the receding hairline using his halberd. The nose-scarred soldier protected him by attacking Walm. Walm dodged and countered, but the strike was blocked. The mage fired more water bullets, carefully avoiding the nose-scarred soldier, who followed close behind them. Walm was shocked. Their coordination was that good. He couldn't make a single move. It was as if he was dancing on a minefield. The nose-scarred soldier attacked again, but Walm met the blow with his halberd, pinning the enemy's sword to the floor, then kicked him away. The one with the receding hairline attacked from behind, but Walm dodged and pushed him back with fire, which had little effect. Walm cursed under his breath. If he kept fighting like this, his mana would run out and he'd be tortured to death. He had no choice but to increase the output of Ignis Fatuus until even the enemy's fire resistance failed. It worked. The soldier with the receding hairline was burned alive. The nose-scarred soldier roared in anger at the death of his comrade. He rushed forward, and the mage fired more water bullets. They came all at once, but instead of hitting Walm, the water struck the burning soldier instead. The mage had prioritized saving his comrade. Walm felt a pang of sadness. They cared about each other, but that's what made them bad soldiers. The nose-scarred soldier lunged again with all his strength, but Walm raised a small flame in front of him. Even so, his opponent pressed on and tried to decapitate him. But his sword flew from his hands, saving Walm from death. The man looked down and realized too late that his hands were burned and he could no longer grip his weapon properly. The nose-scarred soldier dove to grab his sword, but Walm took advantage of the moment and stabbed him in the neck. The only one left was the mage. He looked terrified at first, but after seeing his comrades' bodies, he braced himself and took his stance. Walm glared at him, but then saw the mage's face twist in shock. When he looked down, he saw the nose-scarred soldier he'd stabbed was still alive, gripping Walm's halberd and holding on to his lower body. Walm tried to pull the weapon free, but it wouldn't budge. The soldier coughed blood, but still refused to let go. Walm punched him, but he still wouldn't release it. The mage screamed and charged, swinging his sword. Walm was defenseless. He used his arm guard to block, but it didn't stop the swing completely. The blade missed his neck, but cut deep into his shoulder. Walm screamed in pain, which finally made the dying soldier release his grip with a faint smile before collapsing. The enraged mage ground the stuck sword deeper into Walm's shoulder. Walm rushed forward and tackled him to the ground. The mage's sword flew away, forcing them into a fist fight. The mage punched Walm in the stomach, but Walm used the chance to grab his neck. The mage lifted Walm and slammed him into the floor. But Walm repositioned himself and locked the mage into a chokehold. He tightened his grip as the mage struggled, kicking and clawing until he finally lost consciousness. Walm let go and stood up, but to be sure, he stabbed the mage through the chest. He sat down and removed his mask, catching his breath. They were all dead. Walm didn't notice that the one with the burned body, the man with the receding hairline, had stood back up, clutching his sword. He was about to swing when an arrow pierced the back of his head, dropping him instantly. One of the soldiers who had come with Walm stood there. Walm thanked him but told him he should have come earlier, since he was almost turned into mincemeat. The soldier replied that he wasn't brave enough to throw himself into a raging fire. Seeing Walm's shoulder gushing blood, he carried him outside and leaned him against a wall. As the soldier was about to leave to get bandages, Walm noticed something beside him and pointed at it. The soldier only replied, telling him to wait patiently with his roommate. Leaning against the wall beside a charred corpse, Walm felt uncomfortable until he realized he was the one who had done it. The guilt grew heavier. Below, the main army finally broke through the castle gate, cheering loudly. The mask beside Walm began to vibrate, and he could only wonder how these people could enjoy this so much. What happened so far? Walm, a soldier reincarnated from Japan, now fights for the Highserk Empire. After a battle near the border of Libertoa that ended in victory, his battalion marched through Saria City, where they laid siege to the Myard fort. The Highserk forces won again. From there, they advanced toward the capital of Edinburgh, facing guerrilla tactics from adventurers and the remaining Myard forces. Despite the resistance, the Highserk army prevailed once more. Cornered and desperate, the Myard kingdom sought aid from its neighbor, Ferrius. Together, their armies confronted Highserk on the plains of Reref, but they too were defeated. The Highserk army stayed in Edinburgh for a time to restore order and hunt down the remnants of the enemy before turning their sights on Ferrius, who had supported Myard. Walm's battalion was assigned to the Refin mine, where they endured a months-long siege of the fort before launching a successful night raid. The Highserk Empire's string of victories continued, and their growing expansion began to unsettle neighboring nations. Meanwhile, in the Kingdom of Christ, leaders from Christ, Libertoa, and Ferrius gathered to discuss countermeasures against Highserk's rapid rise. An old man entered the room, his face marked with deep scars. He was Hugo Evans, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of Libertoa. Taking his seat, he casually summoned a small flame with his magic, causing the guards to tense up. But he merely used it to light his cigar. Hugo smirked at their overreaction, teasing one of the guards just enough to irritate him. The guard clenched his jaw, but held back his anger. Leaning back, Hugo began to observe the other representatives present. At the head of the table sat King Chest Christ of the Kingdom of Christ, the host of the meeting. Beside him was King Baristan Ferrius, ruler of the Ferrius Kingdom, currently under invasion by the Highserk army. The Ferrius King's eyes still carried the fire of a man unwilling to surrender. Perhaps that resolve came from vengeance. After all, Walm had killed his brother. When Hugo turned to his left, his gaze landed on a young woman of striking beauty. Curious, he asked who she was. She introduced herself as Rita Myard, the same girl Walm had spared not long ago. 3 weeks had passed since the fall of the fort at Refin Mine. Walm sat inside the base as a healing mage, finished checking him over, declaring that he was fully recovered and no longer needed to stay put. While the Ferrius strongholds were being taken one after another, their remaining soldiers had holed up deep in the mines, slowly destroying themselves from within. On paper, they had enough supplies and manpower to endure. But after endless sieges and constant psychological warfare, their will to fight had crumbled. From the Refin mine to every nearby castle and fort, the story was the same. What finally broke them was a single, chilling warning from the Highserk army. Surrender immediately, or we'll kill you all, soldiers and civilians alike. Walm rose from his cot and went to rejoin his squad. As he walked, he passed rows of captured Ferrius soldiers. Their faces were hollow, their eyes empty, men broken by exhaustion and fear. For a brief moment, Walm felt a twinge of pity, but he quickly pushed it aside and kept moving. He soon ran into Jose, who greeted him with a grin and commented on how healthy he looked. Testing his shoulder, Walm replied that healing magic really was incredible. Wounds that should have taken months to heal were gone in just 2 weeks. Then Noor came over to greet him. Walm smirked, teasing her about how rugged she looked. She slumped dramatically and complained that after he was injured, their squad was sent to capture the castle, and something happened to Burrito. A sluggish figure approached them, Burrito himself. Walm's concern faded the moment he saw his friend's face. Burrito's trademark mohawk was gone. Walm burst out laughing. Burrito groaned in tears, explaining that it was the work of an enemy mage. Jose tried to hold back his laughter, joking that Burrito should be glad the rest of him was still intact, while Noor clapped like the end scene of Evangelion. Off to the side, Walm spotted Willert sitting quietly in the corner. The two exchanged nods of acknowledgement. Everyone seemed fine, so Walm asked about their squad leader, Due. Jose told him that Due had been called over by the platoon commander. Apparently, the mines still weren't completely secured. Judging by the movement of the leading troops, it seemed Highserk was preparing to advance deeper into Ferrius territory. Back in the Kingdom of Christ, the meeting of representatives continued. Among the gathered figures stood Rita, daughter of the former king of Myard. She introduced herself as the representative of the Myard Duchy, a claim that drew immediate skepticism from Hugo Evans. To him, Myard was already a fallen land, its cities taken, its people scattered. The very idea of a representative seemed almost laughable, yet Rita's composure did not falter. She admitted that most of Myard's territories had been lost, but one still remained, the land of Sirta. Sirta was surrounded by a vast lake, abundant in fish and crisscrossed with trade waterways. Once a thriving economic hub, it had long since become a forbidden zone. A lake dragon had made its home there, a creature ranked among the highest class monsters. Though it was a subspecies of dragon, its power was such that even the Highserk Empire had avoided provoking it. But now, that dragon was gone, subjugated. The announcement silenced the hall. Even Hugo, always sharp-tongued, was left in disbelief. 6 months earlier, such a feat would have been unthinkable. Until a man appeared, a fire element user capable of scorching even a dragon. With a single holy strike, the creature had been slain. His name was Akima Yuto, one of the 3 heroes of Christ, and one of the visitors from another world. Somewhere in a small village within Ferrius, Highserk soldiers were laughing among themselves. They boasted about how lucky they were to have joined the Highserk army, how the invasion had brought them freedom to loot, pillage, and do as they pleased. With the skilled Ferrius soldiers wiped out in Myard, only weak resistance remained in the area. One soldier crouched near a corpse, grinning as he began to unzip his pants. Another stopped him, reminding him that they were ordered to move to the next village. The man only laughed, saying that Ferrius women were too good to resist. The others joined in his laughter, until a shadow loomed over them. A crumbling tower collapsed, crushing several soldiers beneath the debris. Dust and screams filled the air. Before anyone could make sense of what happened, one soldier shouted that they were under attack. But before he could say more, his body was split open. Panic spread instantly. The survivors tried to retreat, only to realize they were surrounded. As the dust cleared, their attackers came into view, not Ferrius soldiers, but troops of the Kingdom of Christ. One terrified soldier tried to flee, but was cut cleanly in half. Outnumbered and outmatched, the rest dropped their loot and ran, abandoning everything as they fled the burning village. At the edge of the road, a lone man stood in their path. His voice was calm when he told them to surrender. The Highserk soldiers drew their weapons instead, unaware of the power radiating from him, a blazing magical aura that flared brighter than fire itself. That night, 3 Saria battalions of the Highserk army were annihilated. Over 700 soldiers never returned. Far from the battlefield, Jose was stunned by the sudden order to retreat. It made no sense. They were supposed to be advancing deeper into Ferrius territory. Even Due, their squad leader, admitted that he couldn't believe it himself. When he questioned the war council, the answer he received left him speechless. The kingdoms of Ferrius and Christ, the nation of Libertoa, and the remnants of Myard had joined forces. The squad fell silent. The meaning was clear. Every nation in the northern archipelago had now become their enemy. Burrito, pale and uneasy, asked the question that hung over everyone's mind. The enemy's numbers. The Highserk army deployed in Ferrius numbered 16,000. Even counting the 2 battalions stationed at Edinburgh, they would have around 24,000 troops in total. Due, sweating, gave the final piece of information in a strained voice. The enemy's total force exceeds 60,000. During the royal meeting, the King of Christ proposed the formation of a 4-nation alliance, a pact that emphasized both the military and economic strength of the 4 nations, with the Lake of Sirta designated as the central economic zone. The idea stirred mixed reactions. Hugo couldn't help but laugh, finding amusement in the political play, though his laughter unsettled Rita. He continued for a moment, entertained by the potential chaos such an alliance could bring, before stopping abruptly under the sharp stares of those around him. By the end of the meeting, all representatives had agreed. The 4-nation alliance was officially formed. Meanwhile, back at the Refin mines, Due's squad held their position at the fort. Until recently, the Highserk army had been on the offensive, but the situation had changed. Orders for withdrawal had arrived. The retreat would lead them to the Sarajevo fortress, where a decisive battle was expected to take place. With the men and supplies they had looted, victory was uncertain, but defeat was not yet guaranteed. Their task was to hold the mines long enough for Allied forces to retreat from the interior of Ferrius. Reluctantly, the squad prepared to abandon the mine. Facing an army of 60,000 was beyond their capability. Even Walm, who had narrowly escaped death in recent battles, understood there was no other option. Dewey declared that they wouldn't leave the mine for free, and moments later, explosions echoed through the tunnels. The Highserk forces had begun collapsing the mines, ensuring the enemy couldn't exploit their resources. Dewey informed everyone that the higher-ups had ordered all prisoners of war to be executed, which makes Walm's expression darkened. Dewey himself was against the decision, believing it would be wiser to turn the captives into laborers to carry supplies rather than waste their lives. Walm could only sigh, understanding how little choice any of them had in the matter. For the time being, their mission was to defend the mine and support the retreating forces. Dewey reminded everyone to stay alert despite the defensive advantage. Soon, the battle began. The forces of Libertoa launched an assault, scaling the walls with ladders. Walm shouted for the men to keep them off. Jose rushed to push a ladder away, while Walm hurled a rock that shattered another, sending the attackers falling to their deaths. The enemy's advance grew fiercer. Dewey grabbed a large stone and threw it with such force that it crushed the helmet and skull of an armored soldier. Their platoon commander called out that the left flank was faltering and ordered Walm to reinforce it. Walm dashed to the left wing, where the defenders struggled against enemy mages. Stepping into position, he warned the nearby soldiers of what he was about to unleash. Recognizing the danger, they scattered for cover. Sitting on the ledge, Walm gathered his mana. The enemy noticed him, but too late. With a surge of power, he released Ignis Fatuus. Pale flames erupted across the battlefield, engulfing everything in their path. The soldiers of Libertoa screamed as the fire clung to their bodies, burning through armor and shields alike. Walm watched from above, unmoved. The smell of burning flesh no longer disturbed him. He had grown used to it. When the flames died down, he descended to the ledge. The soldiers nearby whispered about the horror of the scene, yet none condemned him. Instead, they approached to thank him for saving their position, relieved that he fought on their side. Walm could hardly believe it, but the sincerity in their words was clear before they turned away to tend the wounded and restock ammunition. Soon after, Jose called out to him. Dewey's squad was gathering for the next operation. Jose warned that Ignis Fatuus would be used again. Walm simply nodded, saying nothing more. He had already grown accustomed to it. In the distance, the Libertoa forces observed the fort, waiting for the right moment to strike. Their commander intended to break through the defenses and create an opening in the Highserk line while the main army was still occupied. Yet fear lingered among his men. None of them had forgotten the devastation caused by Walm's Ignis Fatuus. It was a weapon born from nightmare and legend, a spectral flame that consumed entire formations in moments. Even the previous company commander had perished under its blaze. Still, the current commander steeled himself and ordered his men to prepare. His subordinates confirmed that the company stood ready, awaiting only his command. Back at the fort, Walm and Jose noticed the movement from afar and prepared to execute their defensive plan. As the Libertoa soldiers advanced into range, they drenched themselves in water and smeared their bodies with mud, desperate to shield against the fire they feared most. Despite their precautions, unease clung to them. Even their commander felt it. His instincts screamed for survival, but the memory of the last defeat pushed him forward. Forcing down his fear, he gave the signal to attack. The Libertoa forces charged toward the fort, only to be met with a sudden storm of arrows. The commander shouted for his men to take cover beneath the walls as volleys rained down from above. When the barrage finally ended, it was followed by a wave of destructive magic. Even so, the soldiers pressed on, reaching the base of the walls and quickly setting up their ladders. Surveying the battlefield, the commander noted with some relief that their casualties were not as severe as expected. His men were already climbing, and for the first time, it seemed victory might actually be within reach. But as the first soldiers neared the top, the world erupted into blue fire. Ignis Fatuus. The ethereal flames spread with terrifying speed, devouring the upper walls and the soldiers upon them. The commander immediately ordered a retreat to the trenches as the fire intensified. Those caught in the blaze frantically rolled in the dirt to smother the flames, their screams drowned by the roar of burning stone and wood. The commander stared in disbelief. Highserk had set fire to its own corridors, sacrificing the fort's defenses without hesitation. Then realization struck him. He cursed under his breath and shouted new orders. The men, confused but obedient, once again raised their ladders and climbed. When they reached the top, they found the corridor empty. The commander clenched his fist and kicked aside a fallen helmet. The truth was bitterly clear. The Highserk forces had been retreating all along. While the Libertoa army fought desperately to seize the fort, the enemy had used the chaos to withdraw, burning everything behind them to cover their escape. He shut his eyes for a moment, humiliated at having been outplayed. Regaining his composure, he ordered the first platoon to extinguish the remaining fires and the second and third to stand guard. Moments later, the scouts he had sent ahead returned with grim news. The Highserk had destroyed the entire military road leading deeper into Ferrius. They had used every resource, every life, to capture this fort, only for the enemy to abandon it at their own convenience. The commander stood in silence, staring at the smoldering ruins, and wondered whether this war against Highserk was worth anything at all. Meanwhile, in a small village, Walm's battalion continued its retreat. The Highserk soldiers were tearing down houses, filling the roads with rubble to slow the enemy's pursuit. Walm heaved boulders onto the main path, while others broke wooden pillars and buried them halfway into the ground, creating crude barricades to buy even a little more time. Exhaustion weighed on him. His legs trembled, his vision blurred, and he nearly collapsed from fatigue. Then the platoon commander arrived with urgent orders. The Libertoa forces were approaching. It was time to withdraw. The soldiers gathered their weapons and supplies in haste. Jose shouted for Walm to keep moving, while Willer tossed him a water pouch. Walm caught it, muttered a quick thanks, and pushed forward. At the rear, Dui scanned the group, making sure no one had been left behind. Once certain his men were all accounted for, he gave the final order to move out. As the battalion marched away, he cast one last look at the smoke-filled horizon and quietly marked the end of their time at the mines. The next battle would be fought at Sarajevo Fortress. Despite the four-nation alliance making steady advances since the start of the campaign, the Highserk army continued to fight with calculated precision. Jeff's cavalry battalion struck the Christ soldiers with relentless raids, while other units used magic to collapse mountains, destroy bridges, and tear apart military roads. These delaying tactics, brutal and methodical, paid off. The Alliance's advance ground to a halt at Refn Mine, buying Highserk the precious time it needed to regroup and prepare for the decisive stand at Sarajevo Fortress. At the Ferrius military camp, chaos filled the tents. A soldier knelt beside his friend, desperately trying to stop the bleeding and pleading for any mage to heal him. But all the mages had already exhausted their magic for the day. The soldier's hope dwindled as he watched his friend's life hang by a thread, until a Christ soldier appeared, gesturing for him to follow. They carried the wounded man to a tent guarded by several sentries, leaving their weapons outside before entering. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, the patients resting peacefully with no life-threatening injuries visible. As they laid the injured soldier down, a young woman knelt beside him. Her hands hovered over his arm, which was nearly severed. In an instant, bones, joints, veins, and tissue regenerated flawlessly. The soldier could only stare, stunned by what he had witnessed. This girl was no ordinary helper. Every soldier brought here had survived under her care. Tears filled the soldier's eyes as he thanked her for saving his friend. She was Sugimoto Ayane, one of Christ's 3 legendary heroes. With the wound fully healed, the arm appeared untouched by injury, as though nothing had happened. Ayane's assistant Maya entered to inform her it was break time. Ayane thanked her, acknowledging that Maya's support allowed even an inexperienced girl to assist with treatments. Maya teased Ayane for her lack of confidence, urging her to recognize her own abilities. She also mentioned that Ayane's friends were nearby. Ayane learned that her companions had fended off the notorious Jeff's cavalry battalion, leaving their allied knights and soldiers swarming around them in celebration. A small smile crossed her face at the news. After finishing her duties in the tent, Ayane stepped outside and met Makoto and Yuto, who had just left the war council. Makoto grumbled about the difficulty of the day's engagement against Jeff's cavalry, whose speed and agility had challenged even the most skilled soldiers. Maya inquired if they had eaten, and upon learning they had not, told them that a noble they had saved had donated a generous amount of food: soft white bread, cheese, sausages, and more. The three heroes' faces brightened, and they rushed to hug Maya in gratitude. Krist's three heroes were visitors from another world, hailing from Japan, just like Walm. Yuto, the dragon slayer, wielded holy and light-based attacks. Makoto, a prodigious mage, commanded all four elemental magics. Ayane, the healer, could mend any wound instantly, without chant or ritual. Though they were still children, their power surpassed any ordinary soldier. Meanwhile, in the Liguria battalion, Due's squad marched steadily towards Sarajevo fortress. Walm, eating his provisions, remained unaware that the battle approaching the fortress would soon bring him into the path of these heroes from another world. The Liguria battalion pressed onward, passing through the remains of once lively villages. Collapsed bridges and burned-out homes lined their path. As they drew closer to their destination, Walm couldn't help but stare in awe at the massive structure before them, the Sarajevo fortress. Once a proud stronghold of the Myard army, it now stood under Highserk control. The fortress was surrounded by steep mountains, its position bordering the demon territory, making it impossible to bypass. It was a natural fortress, a place built to hold its ground against any assault. Yet despite its advantages, it had fallen to Highserk within just 2 days during the invasion of Ferrius. The reason was simple. After the Battle of Edinburgh, Myard no longer had enough soldiers to defend it properly. As the battalion entered the fortress, the sheer number of soldiers inside was overwhelming. It felt as if the entire army had gathered there. Due took a small measure of comfort from the sight, knowing his men weren't the only ones starving. The squad joined in, each eating what they had. Grumbling spread among them about the cramped space and the miserable rations. Still, most agreed that a crowded fort was better than standing alone on the battlefield. Burrito voiced his distaste for the food, and Nor reminded him that hunger left little room for preference. Walm, quiet and withdrawn, sat apart from the noise. While the others gnawed on their potatoes, he focused his attention on the one in his hand. He murmured under his breath, channeling a faint spark of magic into his palm. A dim, flickering heat spread through the potato's surface until its skin began to crisp. He worked discreetly, shielding the glow with his body. The smell of baked potato drifted through the air. He hesitated before taking a bite. The flavor was simple but rich, a brief luxury amid exhaustion. His relief was short-lived. A voice called his name from behind. His heart skipped as he froze, silently cursing himself. When he turned, he found Willard standing there, holding a cup of water, and inside it, a potato. The look on Willard's face said everything. His mana was spent and he wanted Walm to handle it. Without a word, Walm understood the message perfectly. His secret was safe, as long as Willard's potato received the same treatment. Walm accepted Willard's offer on one condition: Willard would handle his water duty for the day. Willard clicked his tongue in annoyance, but agreed. With that settled, Walm conjured a faint glow of Ignis Fatuus, using its heat to boil the potato before handing it back. Willard bit into it with satisfaction, the rich aroma of the cooked potato drifting through the air. It didn't take long for Due to notice. Catching the scent, he asked Willard what he was eating. Willard tried to act casual, while Walm's heart began to pound. Jose snitched on them, pointed out that he'd seen Walm hand something to Willard. Walm tried to deflect and deny, but Due only gave him a look and asked if he could really cook while walking. Jose patted Walm on the shoulder, appealing to his conscience. He reminded him that everyone had been marching for days without a single hot meal. Burrito and Nor joined in, saying that even a boiled potato would be enough to lift their spirits. Reluctantly, Walm gave in. He sighed and told them to hold his things while he worked. As they walked, Walm held a pot over a steady flame, boiling salted water with potatoes inside. The warm scent spread through the fort, drawing curious looks from passing soldiers. Before long, 3 soldiers, known among the squad as the 3 Idiots, approached, teasing Walm by calling him a walking casserole. They pleaded to have their potatoes cooked too, promising to introduce him to a good woman in exchange. The teasing only grew as more soldiers lined up, each clutching their share of potatoes. Jose, ever the opportunist, took charge of the growing crowd and announced that it would cost 1 copper coin per boiled potato. The soldiers were just happy to taste something warm again. As Walm glanced at Burrito and Noor enjoying their food with genuine smiles, he couldn't help but feel a faint warmth himself, something close to peace. That peace didn't last. Jose turned to Noor and asked if she was any good at hunting. She mentioned her grandfather used to hunt in the forest, and Jose's eyes immediately lit up with another ridiculous idea. He proposed it to Walm at once, a walking chicken soup pot business, where they'd make a fortune cooking meals on the move. Walm's patience snapped. Without a word, he unleashed a burst of ignis fatuus beneath Jose's feet. Jose leapt back, shouting at him to retract it before it burned through the ground. Panic spread among the nearby soldiers, some laughing, others demanding refunds for their burned potatoes. Amid the commotion, Noor simply chuckled, amused by how lively the squad remained even in the middle of a grim situation. Later that night, the squad gathered around the campfire, drinking and sharing what little comfort they could find before the storm ahead. Walm broke the silence, asking Jose if it was true that the enemy had already made contact with their advance party. He'd heard the real battle would begin in 3 or 4 days. Jose confirmed it, his tone grim. The enemy force exceeded 50,000. He stared into the fire, muttering that soon the fortress would be buried beneath piles of corpses. The thought weighed on Walm. His gaze dropped to the ground, the crackle of burning wood filling the silence. Quietly, he wished that neither he nor any of his squad mates would be among the dead. The somber mood didn't last. A soldier banged on a pot, calling everyone to dinner. Jose got up with a grin, saying their last supper came earlier than expected. Walm stood too, teasing him to wash his hands first before his mother got angry. Laughter broke the tension, and for a while, they simply ate and drank, the 2 moons above watching over them. Later, as the camp quieted down, Walm sat apart by the rampart, a faint glow from his cigarette cutting through the dark. He exhaled a stream of smoke and stared into the night sky. Jose wandered over and asked why he looked so melancholic. Walm said he'd just been wondering how long the war would last. The question caught Jose off guard. He answered lightly, "Until we win." Highserk had done nothing but win. Each victory brought more land, more enemies, and another war. Domination by force, that was the way of Highserk. They didn't talk, they conquered. And now that same path had led them to fight 4 nations at once. In a world where weakness meant death, Walm couldn't help but wonder, if the war never ended, no matter how many times he fought, what was he supposed to do then? Jose brushed it off, telling him not to lose his nerve now. The enemy might have numbers, but Highserk had the advantage of terrain and fortifications. They wouldn't lose easily. Walm simply nodded, letting it go. Jose lay down beside him, saying nothing more. They sat there together, drinking under the pale glow of the moons. Walm took a sip of his fruit wine and winced at the sourness, which made Jose laugh. A small, fleeting moment of peace shared between 2 soldiers who had long forgotten what peace felt like. Days later, the Highserk Imperial Army's Ligurian battalion stood ready for battle. Across the field, the Christ Royal Army and the Rahazan Night Order began their chants. Then, the clash began. Highserk's barrage of magic rained down first, exploding among the Libertoa and Christ lines. In response, the Knights' chanting reached its peak, and massive earth golems rose from the ground, stomping forward like living fortresses. Jose, watching the growing piles of bodies, muttered under his breath, wondering if this was what a soldier's graveyard looked like. The enemy soldiers charged relentlessly, climbing over fallen comrades to reach the high ground. Noor hurled a stone, striking one in the face and sending him stumbling back. Before the man could recover, a heavy log came crashing down, thrown by Due himself. Walm's attention shifted to the adjacent bastion. The defenders there were faltering, struggling to hold their line, while his own section managed to keep the enemy from breaching. Due quickly ordered him to cast Fireball. As flames began to gather in Walm's palm, a voice called out his name. A messenger was looking for him. A bad feeling crept over him. Jose cracked a joke about some surprise gift waiting for him, but Walm wasn't amused. He met the messenger halfway, who breathlessly reported that the enemy was close to breaking through the rear's right flank. The commander had ordered Walm to stop their advance with Ignis Fatuus. Walm muttered about yet another fire-extinguishing job, and Jose couldn't resist adding that it sounded more like arson. Despite the levity, the situation was dire. Guided by the messenger, Walm sprinted toward the rear line. The scene that greeted him was worse than expected. The defenders were exhausted, their formation buckling under the relentless enemy push. The slope below teemed with enemy troops, all concentrating their assault on a single breach point. If they succeeded, the bastion would fall, and momentum would swing to the enemy. There was no time to hesitate. Walm demanded 2 shields and prepared to unleash his magic. Close combat dominated this world, and dense formations usually meant survival. But against Ignis Fatuus, dense formations became death traps. Sliding his demon mask into his face, Walm released the blue flame. The fire burst outward like a living thing, rolling down the slope. The enemy's screams filled the air as panic spread through their ranks. Some tried to run, but the flames caught them. The blue fire clung to armor and flesh alike, burning through both. It consumed them inside and out, leaving nothing but collapsing silhouettes and the stench of charred metal and flesh. From the top of the wall, Walm watched what his magic had done. When he wore the demon mask, he didn't feel fear or guilt. As long as his face was hidden, he didn't feel human. He just felt like a soldier doing his job. When he climbed down, his commander praised him. Walm only nodded, said thanks, and walked away without a word. The Ignis Fatuus had done terrible damage. The ones who suffered most were the Libertoa and Christ soldiers. 100 dead in one blast, and even more wounded. Because of that, the alliance of 4 nations had to pull back for now. In the trenches, the survivors were covered in burns. They were shaking, eyes empty from what they'd seen. At the Christ army's field tents, the air was filled with screams and the smell of charred flesh. Healing mages ran themselves ragged, trying to treat the flood of burned soldiers. Ayane, exhausted but focused, worked non-stop. She had seen arrow wounds, broken bones, even lost limbs before, but this was different. Everyone brought in now was burned. One man could barely breathe, his throat scorched from the inside. Ayane slid her hand into his mouth, pouring healing magic to fix his windpipe. The man gasped for air again, alive but not well. She couldn't heal him fully. She needed to save mana for others. Moving on, she found another soldier with burns across his lower body. He cried and begged her to help. Ayane squeezed his hand, whispering that it would be okay. She kept healing, one after another, until her vision blurred and her body swayed from mana exhaustion. The other healers had already collapsed. She was the only one still standing. This was the only battlefield she could fight on, so she forced herself to keep going. By sunset, the rush of wounded finally stopped. The tent was quiet, except for tired breathing and the crackle of flames outside. Ayane looked toward the pyres where piles of corpses were being burned. Then, one wounded man crawled toward her. His skin was blackened, but he still smiled weakly and thanked her for saving him. Between sobs, he told her what happened. A man wearing a mask had unleashed blue flames, and in a blink, everyone around him was dead. He was one of the few who survived. Ayane held him gently, telling him to rest. Tears fell from her eyes as she thanked him for staying alive. She was terrified of war, of the man with the blue fire, of losing the people she cared about. All she could do was pray that her childhood friends wouldn't be caught in that same flame. Later, in the command tent, the leaders gathered. Their decision was clear. They would send Yuto, the Dragon Slayer hero, to hunt down the man who wielded Ignis Fatuus. The meeting dragged on inside the command tent, the air heavy with tension. One of the commanders stood and reported grimly that Highserk's bastion was only a temporary line of defense. Even if it fell, the true stronghold, Sarajevo Fortress, was still untouched. Still, the Christ Empire had been the only one in the 4-nation alliance to achieve real progress, taking down 2 bastions. That pride, however, had vanished after yesterday. He continued, saying that during their latest assault, 102 soldiers were killed and 117 were injured, all because of a single Highserk soldier. The tent went silent. Some commanders stared in disbelief, while others trembled. No one wanted to believe that one man could cause that much destruction. The commander then ordered the surviving squad leader from the front to be brought in. The man was carried inside, wrapped in bandages from head to toe, his skin scorched and barely recognizable. His voice was weak but steady as he spoke. He explained that his unit had been ordered to launch a full assault. They charged up the embankment, shields raised, pushing forward. Then someone shouted, "The Ignis Fatuus is here." He didn't believe it. He thought it was just a battlefield myth. But the next moment, everything was over. The soldiers closest to the enemy, within 5 meters, were burned alive in an instant. Those 15 meters away, including him, were left writhing in agony with severe burns. Even those 20 meters out didn't escape unscathed. He said the men were taught that when attacked by magic, they should take cover behind shields or drop to the ground. But with Ignis Fatuus, there was no defense. You couldn't hide. You couldn't block it. All you could do was run, and even then, death still caught you. When the survivor finished, the tent fell into uneasy silence. Fear spread among the officers, not of an army, but of one soldier. Johanna, Knight of the Christ Royal Knights, clenched her fists, remembering the charred bodies she'd seen on the battlefield. They began discussing countermeasures. The only idea that made sense was to lure the Ignis Fatuus user out. No one wanted to volunteer, until Johanna stepped forward. She offered herself and her squad as bait. The commander stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Failure is not an option," he told her. The next morning, Walm was the first to wake. The camp was quiet, the air still thick with the smell of smoke and sweat. When he sat up, his hand brushed against something soft. It was Noor, asleep beside him. He grinned and decided to pull a prank, pinching her nose shut. She jerked in her sleep and swung a punch, hitting Burrito. Burrito jolted awake, half-conscious, muttering that they were under attack before curling back up. Walm tried not to laugh, but seeing Due asleep with his mouth wide open and snoring like a bear made it impossible. The 3 idiots were tangled together like a pile of laundry, while Jose slept peacefully, clutching his canteen like a pillow. For a rare moment, Walm forgot about the smell of death and the stench of mud and blood that clung to the wind. He smiled quietly, drank from his water flask, and lay back down beside his squad, letting himself drift off again, just for a little longer, before the next battle began. Later that morning, Due's squad gathered for their orders. They were to support Platoon Palma, a routine task, or so it seemed. The enemy was expected to push from the trenches, and their job was to drive them back. If it ever looked like the line would break, Walm would unleash his Ignis Fatuus to wipe them out in one go. Walm was told to conserve his mana. Jose would watch over the rookies. Willard would back Walm up with magic. And the 3 idiots were to look for any weak spots and crush them when the chance came. The squad shouted in excitement as they headed to their positions. The battle started in chaos. Walm threw rocks like fastballs, hitting an enemy square in the head and dropping him instantly. Noor's arrows whistled through the air, every shot precise. She wasn't the strongest in close combat, but when it came to archery, she was unmatched even among the veterans. When Walm complimented her, she blushed but didn't slow down. Burrito nearly got skewered by ice spikes, but Jose leaped in, shattering them all with a single swing. Burrito looked at him in awe and muttered his thanks. The fight dragged on. Attack, defend, repeat. Walm noticed something different this time. The enemy felt off. They fought harder, almost desperate. Even their mages, who usually stayed behind, were charging into the fray. He brushed it aside at first until his old habit kicked in, thinking too much in the middle of battle. Burrito shouted a warning, but before Walm could react, a fireball slammed into them. He took the hit without flinching, the explosion washing over him. Jose, Noor, and Burrito ducked behind him, using him as a shield. Walm had learned something during the night raids. Those have an aptitude to an element also had resistance to it. Still, he couldn't believe they were treating him like meat shield. Then, in the distance, he saw Johanna's squad charging. His gut twisted. Something wasn't right. Even the enemy cavalry was moving in. The Highserk mage tried to intercept, throwing a wind blade at Johanna, but she batted it aside like nothing and hurled her spear back. The mage didn't even have time to react before it hit him dead on. Walm realized just how dangerous she was. As Johanna's squad drew closer, the platoon commander shouted for Walm to use Ignis Fatuus. He climbed the ledge and pulled on his mask, but then he froze. Johanna was staring straight at him. Before he could react, she began her chant. Water spheres shot toward him in rapid bursts, and hit him squarely, knocking him off the ledge. He fell hard, the impact jarring his bones. For a moment, his thoughts scattered. Why had he been hit? Everything was the same as yesterday. Then it hit him. He wasn't just part of the fight. He was the target. He reached for his sword, but pain exploded through his foot. Johanna's thrown blade had pinned him to the ground. Walm screamed, his voice echoing across the battlefield. Noor's eyes filled with tears. Burrito clutched his head. Jose finally understood what was happening, but could do nothing except shout Walm's name. Due jumped from the wall, sprinting toward Walm. His body ached, but all he could think about was saving his comrade. The man who'd fought beside him, laughed beside him. He was almost there when a rain of fireballs fell from above, burning into his armor. He stumbled, but didn't stop. Jose, watching from afar, felt his stomach twist. Something terrible was about to happen. A blinding light filled the air. The hero's attack hit Walm before Due could reach him. The explosion swallowed everything. The ground beneath Walm gave way, and he plunged into the darkness as the world above vanished in blinding white. Walm dreamed of his childhood, a time when famine had hollowed out his village. He and his brother scavenged for food, their stomachs tight from hunger. Even their family's fields had dried up. At that rate, they would all starve. His brother called him over, saying he wanted to show him something. When Walm followed, he saw trees full of fruit. The two of them rushed down the hill, laughing, grabbing whatever they could reach, and eating greedily. His brother grinned and told him not to tell anyone. He said Walm needed the food more since he was still growing. Birds gathered around them, drawn by the fruit, and Walm joked that they could make a meal out of the birds too. His brother laughed, calling him a cold bastard, then admitted he was worried about him, that even their parents were. Walm always acts like a grown-up and feels responsible for them. His brother reminded him that he was the youngest, that he should allow himself to be one. He pinched Walm's cheeks and tickled him until they both fell over laughing. Walm felt happy that his brother was worried about him, and he apologizes. Then the dream shifted. He was walking home from work, back when he was still Raizou in Japan. The city lights flickered in the distance. Something nagged at him, a feeling that he had forgotten something important. Then it came to him. Takakura Raizou is dead. A portal tore open beside him, dark shapes writhing within it. Voices whispered for him to jump. He did. Walm woke under a mound of rubble, his body screaming in pain. He forced himself up, checking his injuries, a mangled foot, several broken fingers, and blindness in one eye. The holy strike had burned through half his face, but the dirt that covered him must have shielded him just enough to survive. A cruel mercy. He looked around and found himself in a ditch filled with corpses. Highserk soldiers, his comrades, piled like discarded rags. The stench was unbearable. His heart sank when he saw familiar faces. The three idiots from his squad, lifeless, their eyes gouged out. Turning his head, he saw the rest. Noor, Burrito, everyone. Due's entire squad was gone. Walm fell to his knees and screamed, the sound raw and broken. He stayed like that for a long while, until there were no more tears left. When he finally stood, something in his gaze had changed. He noticed the flag of the Four-Nation Alliance fluttering nearby. The fortress around him was ruined. The front line turned into a graveyard. What had been a battlefield just hours ago was now eerily silent. In the distance, faint lights glimmered along the walls, a black banner waving. Maybe their forces had retreated there, he thought. Maybe. His eyes drifted back to the corpses. Their mutilated faces. Their missing eyes. He remembered what his brother, Hayes, once told him, that those who lost their eyes before death would never reach the underworld, condemned to wander in darkness forever. It looked like every one of his comrades had been tortured before being killed. Walm wondered why anyone would do such cruel things, even to enemies. War was supposed to have rules, he thought. Then a laugh bubbled up from somewhere dark inside him. He remembered how easily he'd killed before, how little mercy he'd shown. Who was he to talk about reason? Death came in an instant, he told himself. It made no exceptions. One moment someone was alive, the next they were gone. This was the truth of war. Kill or be killed. Two enemy soldiers appeared at the edge of the ditch, likely part of a patrol. They saw Walm moving and mistook him for an undead. They approached carelessly, weapons half lowered. Walm sat there, whispering to himself, asking what he wanted. The question circled in his mind. What did he still live for? Duty? Revenge? Loyalty? Hatred? By the time he found his answer, the soldiers were already standing over him. Without warning, he slashed low, cutting both the soldiers' feet clean off. The man collapsed, screaming, and Walm's mouth twisted into a smile before he swung again, taking the man's head. The second soldier charged with his spear, but Walm caught the shaft bare-handed, wrenched it free, and ripped him apart piece by piece. When it was over, silence returned. He looked up at the sky, Ignis Fatuus, the bonfire of the underworld. Maybe, he thought, if he lit one now, his fallen comrades wandering in darkness might see it. Maybe it could guide them home. Something on the ground began to tremble. The demon mask, the same one he had worn before, seemed to call to him. He picked it up. Then Walm raised his hand and summoned his flame. Ignis Fatuus roared to life, engulfing the mound of corpses. He stood there watching as the fire consumed the bodies. When the flames began to spread down the road, he turned and started walking. Walm knew what he had to do, burning every enemy camp that stood in his way. Tents collapsed into cinders, and the night sky glowed with orange and blue fire. The scent of ash clung to him as he walked, driven only by revenge, a burning need to make them suffer for what they had done to his comrades. At the sixth circle of the enemy camps, inside a tent, Yuto couldn't fall asleep. The screams of soldiers from earlier lingered in his mind. As he was trying to get a grip, his childhood friend Makoto ran inside his tent, notifying him that they were under attack. Yuto quickly got up and asked about the welfare of Johanna and Ayane. As he left his tent, he saw a large blue fire as massive as a mountain spreading through the different circles at a terrifying rate. This meant the Ignis Fatuus user was still alive. Yuto thought he had already killed him and assumed that Walm had become an undead. Yuto still felt guilt for the people he had killed, but he continued to run toward the fire out of worry for Ayane and Johanna. Meanwhile, in another circle inside a tent, different factions from every nation were fighting over who was going to launch an all-out attack tomorrow on Highserk. They were like a bunch of vultures fighting over a carcass. The Christ were not joining in since their contribution guaranteed future authority for each country. That's why everyone wanted to spearhead. But now that the three heroes had defeated the Liguria battalion, the Empire of Christ had done enough. Johanna, bored of it, suggested that they just draw lots, which pissed them off. Meanwhile, Rita Myard just watched the situation unfold from a distance. Her knight offered her tea, which helped her stay calm in this tense situation. Johanna and everyone then suddenly felt a tremor and heard noises. It sounded like fighting, and someone warned them that it might be spies. So it was better to stay put and wait for information on the attack, since the place was well guarded. But Johanna felt the air turn chill, carrying a magic power that felt familiar to her. Then guards went inside the tent, informing them that the attack was coming from the third circle. They thought it came from the undead. They asked how many undead there were, and the soldier replied that it was only one, the same Ignis Fatuus user they had been ordered to kill earlier. Panic erupted as they asked for his current location, only for the guard to be engulfed by blue flames. The fire exploded toward them. Johanna quickly moved and kicked the table to cover herself from the blast. In an instant, the tent burned down, and as the fire died out, only 7 people survived inside the tent. Rita survived too because her knight, Lutwidge, covered her. As one soldier finally sighed in relief, something stabbed him from behind. Before he could look back, he was engulfed by blue flames. One commander lunged at Walm, but Walm moved so quickly that he immediately cut him in half. In an instant, only 5 people remained. As Johanna drew her weapon, she couldn't believe that Walm could still fight in that state. His armor was tattered, and his body was covered in wounds. They looked at each other, then both gathered their mana as they clashed. Walm was the first to attack, swinging his halberd with an enhanced strike. Johanna barely managed to defend against it, and couldn't believe Walm still had such strength, despite his broken fingers. Walm unleashed his Ignis Fatuus, but Johanna reacted quickly, using earth magic to raise a wall of rock to shield herself. It wasn't enough. The blast pushed her back. As the dust settled, Johanna looked directly into Walm's eye and realized he wasn't undead. He was still alive. That made him even more dangerous. Without allies around, Walm could use his full strength without restraint. Johanna finally understood that Walm had come here to avenge his fallen comrades. Johanna tried to talk to him, telling him that fighting was useless and that he was the last man standing from the Liguria battalion. That only enraged Walm. He released another wave of Ignis Fatuus, but before it could reach her, Lutwidge stabbed Walm in the side, causing the flames to dissipate before they could incinerate Johanna. Walm winced in pain as he glared at the old man. He swung his halberd at him, but Johanna joined the fight, turning it into a 2-on-1 battle. In the distance, Rita sat frozen as the world around her burned. She couldn't stand up. Nothing made sense. Just a minute ago, there had been more than 20 people in the tent, and now only 5 remained. As she backed away, she noticed something about Walm. He looked familiar. Then Walm was pushed back, landing right in front of her. Their eyes met, and they recognized each other. Walm muttered only one thing, that he regrets not killing her that night. The words shattered Rita. She remembered the kind expression Walm once had, now twisted with pain and rage. Lutwidge swung his sword at Walm, but Walm blocked and countered. The three continued their deadly exchange. Rita sat on the ground, trembling. She had always believed she was doing what was best for her country, yet now she couldn't even move. She wanted to help him somehow, but she couldn't, because Walm was here as a result of what they had done. Moments later, the fight was over. Lutwidge returned to Rita's side and asked if she was okay. Rita replied that she was fine and asked about Walm. It seemed that Walm had used Ignis Fatuus again, creating a distraction to escape the tent. Lutwidge looked down and confirms that Walm was the one who had spared their life that night. But for now, they had to put that aside and move on. Other important leaders left their hiding places, stunned to be the only survivors. Experiencing Ignis Fatuus firsthand made a huge difference. They had completely underestimated Walm, and now agreed he was more dangerous than the 3 heroes. Their only option was to regroup with the rest of the troops and find the Knight Commander in charge. Rita followed them, hating herself for feeling powerless at such a critical moment. Meanwhile, at Sarajevo Fortress, Commander Gerard Berger of Highserk sat in his office, smoking a cigar and planning his next moves. The Christ heroes had been a constant thorn in his side, and he hadn't expected the defeat of the Liguria battalion. He had survived many battles and seen almost everything, but he could not bring men back from the dead. He had to work with the resources he still had. Berger considered traps and assassination, sabotage, and suicide squads, but each option was either impractical or too small to matter. He settled on Plan B, hold the fortress as long as possible, and use scorched earth delaying tactics on the Myard front. Abandoning the territory now would get him stripped of command by the Imperial Council, sent to rot in the countryside, a fate he dreaded. Then the windows began to shake. He stepped out to the rampart himself and looked down. A huge blue blaze raged across the bastion. Berger laughed, a wild grin spreading across his face. Walm was still alive. Berger ordered an all-out mobilization and to set a trap. Every available soldier would move. Tonight's battle had to be decisive. When one man questioned the order, Berger cut him off. Their only ally was speed. Time was everything. He barked orders until the camp sprang into life. Walm set ablaze a storeroom, causing panic throughout the camp as everyone focused on the fire instead of his whereabouts. They desperately tried to put it out before it reached the oil barrels stored nearby, but the flames grew stronger by the minute, and the wounded began to pile up. Meanwhile, Walm was dragging a dead Ferrius soldier to a secluded spot. His side wound suddenly burst open, blood spilling out. The injury he received from the old man was worse than he thought. As he caught his breath, his mind drifted to thoughts of reason and morality. What was the point of revenge anymore? He couldn't find the 3 heroes or the main force of the Rardson cavalry. He couldn't kill Johanna. He had even been beaten by an old man. Looking up at the sky, Walm muttered to his fallen comrades, asking if the fire he'd started was enough for them. If they wanted to laugh at him, now was the time. After a brief moment of silence, he decided it was time to find a way out, but first, he needed a change of clothes. When the search party finally arrived, they found a Ferrius soldier lying on the ground, wincing in pain. One of them rushed over, asking if he was all right, then lifted him up to help him walk. As they moved, the soldier told him to keep talking so he wouldn't lose consciousness. The wounded Ferrius soldier was none other than Walm. As he glanced back at the burning storehouse, Walm silently thanked his old armor for saving him so many times and apologized to it in his mind. The soldier carrying him said he looked terrible, but reassured him that the sickbay was safe and well guarded. Walm considered killing the man at the first opportunity, but decided to play along for now. Once inside, he'd blend in with the other patients. Walm chuckled under his breath, and the soldier laughed as well, saying he should be glad to have survived. This night, he said, felt like something straight out of a nightmare, one he wished he could wake up from. When they arrived at the sickbay, the soldier called for the healing hero, laid Walm down, and said goodbye, assuring him they'd take care of him now. A few moments later, the hero arrived. It was Ayane. Walm immediately recognized her as one of the three heroes, confirming the rumors that all of them had been summoned to this world. Maya began to diagnose his condition. Bruises covered his body. A large laceration stretched across his left abdomen and ankle. All the fingers on his left hand were broken, and 3 of his ribs had simple fractures. Ayane placed her hands on him and began to heal. In an instant, his wounds closed. Walm was shocked by the speed and intensity of her magic. He had never seen regeneration like this before. No wonder their troops could fight recklessly with a healer like her around. It also meant she was a serious threat to both Highserk and the Empire. She had to be dealt with. Eventually, Walm reached for his sword, but hesitated. If he attacked now, they would kill him instantly, and besides, no one had ordered him to kill her yet. So he stayed still and let Ayane finish healing him. After it was done, all of his wounds were healed except for his burned eye. He thanked Ayane, and she replied that she was just glad she could help. Walm then proceeded to leave the room and move on to his next step, blending in with the other patients so he would be out of sight in no time. As he reached the hallway, he saw Johanna and the other 2 heroes, so he decided to back away and hide. Walm calmed himself and tried to assess the situation. One enemy who could recognize him by face was now blocking his only exit. He had no choice but to act natural and blend in. He pulled his scarf up to cover half his face and tried to pass by. Walking toward them was nerve-wracking. The 3 were talking, saying they were glad Walm was nowhere near them. Johanna blamed herself, saying that if she hadn't been careless, a lot of damage could have been prevented. The other 2 tried to cheer her up. Meanwhile, Walm kept moving, trying to slip past, when Johanna suddenly felt something. Walm was almost at the exit. Just when he thought he was safe, Johanna called him out, asking if they knew each other. Johanna didn't know any Ferrius soldiers, but Walm looked familiar for some reason. Walm looked back and told her they had passed each other briefly during the attack in the inner circle. Johanna accepted it. Ferrius soldiers had been stationed there, and then asked what had happened to Walm's eye. He replied that it had been burned badly by an enemy's magic. Johanna told him he was lucky and apologized for the interruption. Walm bowed and said something about it being an honor to speak with a knight. He rushed for the exit and made it through. Now, he just needed to stay calm and blend in. Suddenly, someone rushed in, looking for the great heroes and Johanna, which made Walm stop in his tracks. The messenger told the 3 they were to report immediately to Knight Commander Gran. Highserk soldiers were attacking and had already broken into this circle. Everyone, including Walm, was in disbelief. Johanna asked how they broke through so easily. The messenger explained they hadn't smashed the front was still intact. Instead, Highserk soldiers had charged out from hidden tunnels, covered by the fires. A plan by Highserk's war god, Gerard Berger. Everyone was shocked that there were underground tunnels. To make things worse, Commander Jeff's cavalry were attacking on horseback in their hundreds, and the numbers kept growing. Walm couldn't believe his allies had a counterattack like this. Johanna told the messenger that she and the heroes would eradicate the problem at its root. the tunnels, which made Walm twitch. The messenger then guided Johanna and the two heroes to their commander, and they ran toward the exit where Walm stood. Walm was conflicted. This was his single best chance to escape unnoticed, but if he let them pass, they would cost many lives. For a moment, he thought of doing nothing. He told himself what he had done was enough, and that he had fulfilled his duty. But remembering the corpses of his squad, a voice whispered at him,
"You're gonna let them die? Just like then?"
The low blow made him curse aloud. He decapitated the messenger instantly, shocking everyone. As Johanna rushed forward, Walm shouted, "Nobody move an inch. If anyone tries to leave, I'll color this area bright blue," and he burned the messenger's body with his bright blue flame. They finally recognized who he truly was. Walm smirked and told them that both the healer and all the wounded would be taken as his hostages. Johanna thought to herself that they were screwed. Walm was blocking their only way out. She had to end this quickly, or else, in a few minutes, the Highserk army would retake the 6th circle. Walm knew time was on his side, so he tried to delay their moves. It became a race against time. Johanna couldn't read Walm's empty eyes. Walm told them he didn't want to burn the wounded or the medics who had healed them, so they all better not move. Yuto called Walm a coward and accused him of bluffing, but Walm ignored him. Johanna argued they could withstand his ignis fatuus, but Walm already knew the truth. A few of them could stand it, but most could not. The wounded touched their burns, traumatized by Walm's fire. Johanna called Walm inhuman, and he answered that they were no different from him. Yuto, not grasping the full danger, decided to move and attack Walm. Johanna also advanced, turning it into a 3-on-1 fight, while Walm gathered mana to unleash Ignis Fatuus. Suddenly, Ayane rushed out of the treatment room to see what the commotion was about. A blast enveloped the space, blue fire filled the room, and the wounded screamed in pain. But it was not enough. Johanna and the others were still alive because Johanna raised earth to shield the three heroes, but the blast was so powerful it still hit them. Yuto broke both arms and Makoto was impaled by debris from the shattered barrier. In an instant, 2 of the 3 heroes were down. Walm told Johanna to surrender and promised he would kill her quickly, but she refused. Then a new hole opened in the sickbay. Commander Gran had arrived. Gran immediately struck at Walm. Walm blocked, but Gran's blow was so strong it battered Walm's side and sent him flying. Johanna tried to apologize for her mistake, but Gran cut her off and ordered her to take the wounded heroes and retreat. The circle would soon be overrun, and they had no time to waste. Johanna protested, but Commander Gran insisted she go, and he stayed behind to hold off Walm. Walm finally stood up from the blow. The commander was impressed. He thought his attack would be enough to finish him, but Walm was different. He still had plenty of tricks left up his sleeve. Drawing his sword, Walm said he wouldn't let the knight and the 3 heroes escape. The commander replied that he had no intention of letting Walm chase after them either. Their swords clashed, and Walm immediately felt the weight behind the commander's strikes. This man was no joke. His power was on par with Due's. Both of them fought with brute strength, so Walm decided to switch up his style. But the commander suddenly grabbed Walm's arm and sword with one hand, locking him in place. He swung his greatsword, but Walm barely dodged and backed away, only for Gran to follow up with a punch to the face that disoriented him. Gran pressed the attack again. He was a monster, strong, skilled, heavily armored, and still perfectly composed. Walm couldn't rely on his past experiences here. Gran read every move and didn't even show signs of exhaustion. Compared to him, fighting Johanna almost felt easier. To make things worse, Gran didn't care about the wounded around them. The two were fighting in the sick bay, surrounded by injured soldiers who had survived Walm's earlier flames. Walm didn't want to burn them all, which kept him from using his magic freely. Gran swung again, and Walm dodged midair before countering, but his strike was too shallow. Gran retaliated with a wide slash, forcing Walm to leap back. Then one of the patients screamed in agony. Gran's strike had severed the man's hand. The sudden cry broke the rhythm of the battle, forcing both fighters to halt for a brief moment. Gran looked at the wounded man with detached calm, offering a half-hearted apology before coldly demanding silence. The words unsettled even Walm. Gran spoke as if the lives around them were nothing more than noise interrupting his task. He declared that from that moment onward, no one was to utter a single sound. The fight resumed. Gran thought his victory was near. Earlier, Walm had the upper hand when he took hostages, but now his conscience was holding him back. That was Walm's biggest flaw, his unstable mind. Gran's strikes came heavy and relentless. Walm was on the defensive the whole time, each blow hitting not only him but the nearby patients too. Limbs were slashed off, but no one dared to scream. Then Gran landed a brutal slash from Walm's shoulder down to his side, sending him to his knees. Gran slowly approached, ready to crush Walm's skull with his bare hands. But something bothered him. Walm hadn't used Ignis Fatuus even once. He brushed off the thought and grabbed Walm's head. That's when Walm smirked and grabbed Gran's wrist. It was a trap. Gran tried to slash him, but Walm blocked the strike with the hilt of his sword and used the opening to slice off Gran's fingers. Gran screamed in pain and swung his greatsword down in anger, but Walm was already gone. Gran looked around frantically until he sensed movement behind him and stabbed, but it was only a patient. He couldn't believe it. Walm was just there a moment ago. Now he was gone, and Gran couldn't use his hand properly. At first, Gran thought Walm's earlier moves were all just traps, but they weren't. Walm had simply adapted, using the wounded as cover, fighting carefully, and learning how to move despite his restraints. In that short time, he had already adjusted to the situation. Using one of the patients as a decoy, Walm stabs the commander in the side. For the first time, Gran felt a chill, a real sense of fear. The stab didn't pierce through completely because of his armor. Gran tried to swing again, but Walm ignited the tip of his sword with Ignis Fatuus, setting Gran's armor ablaze. That had been Walm's plan all along, to burn him alive. Gran fought back even while burning. He managed to cut Walm's sword in half, but Walm didn't stop. He used the same patient as a shield. The poor man just smiled faintly, accepting his fate. Moments later, the Highserk army finally arrived. Walm dropped the body while Gran tore off his burning armor. Accepting defeat, Gran said he'd take Walm's head next time. Walm just smirked and said, "Bark all you want, loser." Meanwhile, Yuto was screaming, begging Johanna to return to the sick bay because Ayane was still there, but she ignored him. Carrying the two injured heroes, she ran without looking back. Gran also left, despite Walm's taunts about, "Aren't you forgetting something?" That something was Ayane, who was left unconscious. When the Highserk soldiers entered the sick bay, they almost attacked Walm, mistaking him for an enemy because of the Ferrius armor he wore. Walm quickly stopped them and explained that he was from the Liguria battalion under Due's command, and that the armor was just a disguise. He was barely standing, bleeding heavily. A captain recognized him by the red scarf and ordered his men to stand down. They were sent by Commander Berger to retake the lost circles and to assist the lone hero who gave them a chance to strike back. Thanks to Walm, the sixth circle had finally fallen. The captain walked away cheerfully, already thinking of the victory ahead. A healer came over and asked if Walm wanted water or a cigarette. Walm took the cigarette and tried to light it with his Ignis Fatuus, but he was completely out of mana. He chuckled at his own helplessness. Then the cigarette suddenly lit up. The healer smiled, saying he'd always wanted to see the Ignis Fatuus, but since Walm was out of energy, he'd use his own fire for now. He thanked the healer, promising that once his strength returned, he'd let him see the real thing as much as he wished. Meanwhile, in another circle, Hugo sat back and puffed on his cigar. His guard approached, informing him it was time to move. They couldn't stay there any longer. Hugo only smirked. In a single night, the four-nation alliance was already on the brink of collapse. Two of the three heroes had been defeated by Walm, and the last one, a healer, had been taken prisoner. Hugo laughed to himself. Things were finally getting interesting. Now, it was his turn to move. Walm woke up in a bed, disoriented, until a Highserk soldier greeted him, assuring him he was safe and that they were now inside Sarajevo Fortress. Walm asked about the current state of the battle. The soldier explained that while Walm had slept for an entire day, the four-nation alliance suffered heavy losses and retreated to their previous positions. The Highserk army had reclaimed both Sarajevo Fortress and the outer rings. Both sides were back to where they started, but this time, Highserk stood as the victor. The soldier added that the victory was thanks to Walm's efforts. Walm lowered his gaze as he took a sip of water. He didn't care if he had died in the process, yet he couldn't bring himself to accept death either. No matter how much he wanted to let go, he was still clinging to life. They had won, but at a cost. He was the sole survivor. The soldier noticed the change in Walm's expression, his concern showing. He told Walm that once he finished his drink, he needed to report to Commander Berger and inform him that he'd regained consciousness. Walm joked that he wanted a few refills first. The soldier chuckled and told him he could have as much as he wanted. When Walm asked if he wasn't in a hurry, the soldier replied that even if Walm had woken up earlier, his report wouldn't be due until tomorrow anyway. Elsewhere in the fortress, Berger was in the middle of interrogating a prisoner. His tone was cold, detached, as he cut into the man's fingers piece by piece. He told Ayane that a prisoner of war was nothing more than a burden to both armies. Berger was trying to force her to heal Highserk soldiers, but Ayane refused. He warned her that if she wanted to survive her stay, she needed to make herself useful. With so many wounded, they couldn't afford dead weight. He plunged his blade into the prisoner's side without hesitation. Highserk wasn't out of danger yet, and Berger would do whatever it took to keep his forces alive. He told her she still had time to decide. There were plenty of prisoners left, but if she continued to resist, he would start with her assistant, Maya. Faced with the threat, Ayane finally gave in and agreed to cooperate. As Berger turned to leave, Ayane's voice trembled behind him. She asked how he could still call himself human after everything he'd done. Berger paused only for a moment before answering, "In war, nothing is human. I just do what needs to be done." Then he walked away, leaving her in silence. Later, in Berger's office, Walm finally arrived. Berger greeted him with rare warmth, expressing his gratitude for his accomplishments. Walm's success was remarkable. His name had already spread across the entire Ferrius army. Walm, however, humbly insisted that his actions were overestimated, claiming it was mere luck that he survived while his battalion was slaughtered. He admitted his regret, saying that if he had awakened earlier, things might have been different. Berger acknowledged the heavy loss of the Liguria battalion, especially Duai's squad, calling it a blow both professionally and personally. Yet he reminded Walm that he could have run and no one would have blamed him. But instead, he chose to fight, and for that, he deserved to be rewarded. Berger then announced Walm's promotion to knight status. The title caught Walm off guard, but Berger explained that it was an honorary distinction rather than an official rank. Still, it carried weight both on the field and at home. The rumor of Walm's feats had already reached their homeland, and the council needed a new national hero. Berger congratulated him, calling this the first step toward becoming a war god. He presented Walm with a new set of armor and a personal gift, a magic pouch. It was an old one, slightly limited in capacity, but it could carry far more than a normal bag and always felt as light as air. Walm thanked him sincerely, saying he would make good use of it. Berger wasn't finished though. Having heard that Walm's sword had snapped, he handed him a replacement, an imperial blade, crafted for knights who had distinguished themselves in battle. Walm held the sword, admiring the craftsmanship and balance. Berger then informed him that, from this point on, he would serve directly under his command. His first assignment had already been decided, to keep watch over a very important individual. Walm's new duty was to act as the personal guard of one of Christ's 3 heroes, Ayane Sugimoto. Walm met Ayane and introduced himself, explaining that he was assigned to both protect and monitor her. Including him, there would be 4 guards stationed at all times to ensure her safety. He noticed how unusually calm Ayane seemed about the arrangement, to the point that he began to suspect she didn't realize he was the same man responsible for killing countless soldiers and injuring her childhood friends. Maya, Ayane's assistant, also introduced herself, reminding Walm that they had already met once before. It was clear they both knew who he truly was, so Walm simply thanked her for patching him up. He then explained that they wouldn't interfere with their work, but during emergencies, they would have to follow the guard's orders. Ayane and Maya began treating the injured while Walm watched from the side. He couldn't help but be impressed. The 2 of them were saving soldiers who should have been dead within a day. Morris, one of the guards, joked that Walm looked like he'd rather be out on the battlefield. Walm replied that Morris should drop the formalities since he'd joined the army before him. Morris laughed and said he didn't really have combat experience. He'd just been an errand boy for the chief of staff. Still, he mentioned proudly that he had a poison resistance skill, claiming that poisons actually tasted good to him now, which left Walm dumbfounded. Moments later, both of them were quietly amazed at Ayane and Maya's work. They were saving one dying soldier after another. Walm thought it was more terrifying than any offensive spell he'd ever seen. That was the difference. Ayane's power to heal was what made her a hero. Her lack of medical knowledge was perfectly balanced by Maya's expertise, and together they left no scar behind. They were, without a doubt, a perfect pair. A week passed, and Ayane and Maya had become beloved figures among the Highserk soldiers. Every man they healed seemed to bring them gifts: flowers, trinkets, even food from their own rations. The sick bay, once filled with groans and the stench of blood, now carried the light chatter of men. Walm could feel it too. The air was lighter. He watched Ayane talking to the Highserk soldiers as if they hadn't been enemies only days ago. Her laughter blended with theirs, and for a brief moment, Walm found himself smiling. The mood shifted when Morris brought in a new patient, a worker who had fallen from the ramparts. Walm called Ayane and Maya over, and together they laid the man on the table. Ayane placed her hands on the wound, and within minutes, the light from her palms faded. The man sat up, stunned, thanking her again and again for healing him so quickly. But something felt wrong. The man's hand never opened. Walm had seen enough patients to know that most relaxed the moment the pain left their bodies, but this one kept his fist tight, muscles stiff. He could have been cramping or hiding something. Walm's instincts screamed. He surged forward, using an acceleration skill. The patient sprang up, metal glinting between his fingers, a small spiked knuckle aimed straight at Ayane. Walm caught his arm mid-swing and crushed it under his boot. Bone cracked. The assassin howled in pain. Walm sarcastically apologized for injuring the man right after he'd been healed. The assassin twisted his wrist, flicking poison darts toward Ayane. Walm's sword flashed. Each dart split in midair before hitting the ground. The assassin froze, wide-eyed, staring at the blade. It wasn't an ordinary weapon. Forged from a dragonfire core alloyed with enchanted silver, it channeled magic like a living thing. Along it was a small engraving. Si vis pacem parabellum, that means, if you want peace, prepare for war in Latin. Walm moved in, slicing through the assassin's arm before he could make another move. He shouted for the others to bind and gag him, but by the time they reached him, the man was already convulsing. Poison hidden in his molars. Within seconds, he was dead. Ayane stood frozen, staring at the corpse. Her voice trembled as she asked, almost to herself, why anyone would do such a thing. Morris reassured Ayane that everyone in the sick bay was on her side. Then, he shared something Walm had told him earlier, that healing could be more frightening than any attack. If the people she saved returned to the battlefield to kill again, then she too bore part of that burden. No one was innocent in war, not even a healer. The words struck deep. Ayane's eyes welled up, her hands trembling as the weight of what he said sank in. Walm quietly stepped in, announcing that treatments were over for the day and told both women to come with him. That evening, the two of them sat down for dinner. Maya encouraged Ayane to eat, though her appetite was faint. Walm stood nearby, keeping watch. When he noticed a bottle of wine, he told them not to drink since they were underage. Maya blushed and protested that she was 21, while Ayane was 16 both, she insisted were adults. Walm realized his reaction came from the customs of his old world. He then reached into his magic pouch and pulled out a small pan and a block of cheese. Handing it to them, he suggested melting it to eat with bread. The gesture caught both women off guard. They watched as the hardened soldier offered simple comfort in the form of warm food. Walm urged them not to be shy, and even offered some of his mead, recalling something Jose once told him, that even on the battlefield, one shouldn't live on a bland diet. As the smell of melted cheese filled the air, Ayane finally smiled. The tension in her shoulders eased, and for a brief moment, the war outside felt far away. Later, as Walm stepped out into the night, he told them that if they ever needed anything, he'd do what he could to provide it. Alone in the quiet corridor, he muttered to himself that he was a hypocrite, feeling sorry for the girl whose suffering he had helped cause. Inside, Ayane watched him go, the flicker of lamplight reflecting in her eyes. Meanwhile, back at the Four Nation Alliance camp, someone whispered to Hugo that the assassination had failed. Hugo told everyone at the meeting that if they continued like this, they would lose the war without a doubt. Rita spoke back, saying that didn't mean they couldn't win, and she screamed at Hugo for suggesting burning the outer territories of Myard. Hugo's plan involved the ruthless firebombing of demon territories, intending to drive the demons into the Highserk Empire and wipe out both the Empire and its people. And there might be casualties among the people of Myard, but for Hugo, that was a necessary sacrifice. The Ferrius King stated that, according to prior agreement, any decision would be put to a vote, which Commander Gran of Christ agreed to. Rita, the representative of Myard, opposed it. The Kingdom of Ferrius voted yes. Meanwhile, in the demon territory, Lethia, the leader of the adventurer party Walm had encountered, was there, planning something that would cause a catastrophe. Meanwhile, in a certain village, a girl was lost in memories of her mother. Her mother, her reason to live. But now her mother lay lifeless before her. The girl screamed and clawed at the ground, begging her mother to hurry or they would both die. Her mother did not respond. In the vicinity of Sarajevo Fortress, the former territory of the Myard Kingdom, now under the effective control of the Highserk Empire, the village was being overrun by monsters. The girl heard heavy stomping nearby. When she looked up, she was completely surrounded by goblins and a hobgoblin. They closed in, pinned her to the ground, and began to assault her as she screamed for her mother to save her. Inside Sarajevo Fortress, the entire command was in a panic. One by one, the territories they had fought for were falling. Reports indicated that, in a single village alone, 90,000 monsters had appeared, with civilian casualties already exceeding 40,000. The monsters were rampaging uncontrollably across all regions on an unprecedented scale. Burger finally understood what was happening. He gripped his fist tightly and explained that it had to be the Great Rampage, something that had occurred before, and Burger had been there when it did. When a demon territory's nest is damaged past a certain point, the demons begin to destroy everything around them without aim. Anything and anyone caught in the carnage is reduced to ashes without exception. A terrifying phenomenon. However, what Burger had experienced before was on a far smaller scale. And even then, it had destroyed a neighboring country, caused 10,000 casualties, and heavily damaged Highserk's border defenses. Burger deduced that the four-country alliance had likely triggered this to stall Highserk's march toward victory. Burger told everyone they were going to abandon Sarajevo Fortress. They would fall back to the former Myard Kingdom border and establish a defensive line by deploying troops from the Kanoa region and their homeland. One of the soldiers asked how Burger could throw away the territory they had fought so hard to take from Myard. Burger told them they had underestimated the threat. If anything, even Kanoa and the homeland were now at risk. If they could just protect the capital, the imperial city, that alone would count as a victory. He clicked his tongue and urged everyone to move immediately, for every decision made from that moment on would determine the survival of the Highserk Empire. Burger saw that there would be no victors in this madness, only equal losers. Meanwhile, in the territory of the Ferrius Kingdom, an adventurer team was now fleeing alongside the displaced civilians. The people of Ferrius were grumbling, unable to understand what was happening. They were citizens of the kingdom, yet they had become refugees just like the Myard people. Lethia, the leader of their adventurer team, was one of those who had damaged the nest and set off the rampage. Guilt gnawed at her. She had believed she was acting for the sake of the Myard Kingdom, but now it seemed there would be no kingdom left. She couldn't help but blame herself and wish she were dead. In the royal capital of Ferrius, the castle was being overwhelmed by monsters. The king of Ferrius could do nothing but watch as his final line of defense in the throne room was devoured by the rampaging monsters. The king blamed himself for not seeing through the people behind the reports. The strategy devised in that council meeting had succeeded too well. The monsters driven from the territory should have surged toward Highserk, but they hadn't. It was beyond anyone's predictions. First, they flooded the former Myard Kingdom's territories, and now, right before the king's eyes, his own kingdom had fallen too. All he could do was apologize to his brother. Even after obsessively studying history books, even knowing full well about the Great Rampage, he had still chosen revenge against Highserk, leading to the fall of their kingdom. All this foolish king could do was declare to Highserk that he would be waiting for them in hell before being devoured by ghouls. And with that, the kingdom of Ferrius had fallen, and the four-nation alliance had collapsed. Walm was still escorting Ayane as they retreated. The road was littered with the corpses of both humans and monsters. Ayane asked Walm what was happening. He told her that the four-nation alliance had set fire to a demon territory, causing the rampage, leaving them no choice but to abandon Sarajevo Fortress. They were rallying forces at Dandurg Castle to stop the monsters' advance. While Walm was still explaining, one of the soldiers notified them that they were being ambushed. It was a group of goblin riders. Walm was shocked that the advance squad had failed to detect them. Even so, he stepped out of the wagon to face the goblin riders. Walm's first move was to burn the enemy vanguard. They were hit directly, left engulfed in flames and screaming in pain, but four riders had managed to slip around him and break through. They ignored Walm entirely and drove straight for the wagons. The goblins engaged the soldiers guarding them. Walm cut one rider clean in half, and when another came at him from an awkward angle, he burned it down with his flames. Now only one rider remained. When he went to look for it, the wolf mount suddenly lunged at him. He drove his weapon into its mouth, but something felt off. The goblin riding it was nowhere to be seen. Then he spotted it above him, descending with blade raised. Walm brought the end of his halberd up to parry, letting the sword slide along the blade before slamming into it, splitting the sword and crushing the goblin's head into a smear. After the battle, Walm began to investigate. He was puzzled by the goblin's level of combat readiness and coordination, and unsettled by the fact that there had only been 12 of them. Far too few for a typical goblin horde. One of the soldiers approached Walm, admired his ignis fatuus, and then delivered grim news. A squad escorting refugees up the road had been annihilated, and the refugees with them had been killed as well. Walm suspected the goblin riders might be from the same horde, but the unusually small number still bothered him and left him with a bad feeling. Before dismissing the soldier, he told him to keep a close eye on the prisoners. Walm returned to his wagon, where Morris welcomed him back. He looked at a worried Ayane and assured her that the ambushers had been dealt with. He sat down, quietly regretting that he had never learned mounted combat. Morris offered to teach him, but only if Walm let him dress him in velvet and satin garments. Walm passed on the offer. As they proceeded, they came upon the squad and refugees mentioned in the report. Walm investigated the corpses and noticed they had died recently. Strangely, it didn't appear that the goblin riders were responsible. Both the humans and the goblin riders had been attacked. Walm wondered what kind of monster had done this. A soldier called out and reported finding corpses with massive bite marks, clearly torn apart by teeth. On the ground were tracks, 3 forward-hooking claws and 1 rear claw. Walm asked if anyone knew what kind of monster could have made them, but the soldier admitted they had no idea and were hoping Walm would know. Walm had only ever hunted small, low-ranked monsters and had never encountered anything of this scale. He ordered them to move the corpses. They were blocking the wagons. As they moved the bodies, Walm carried his carefully while the others tossed them aside. He couldn't blame them. There was no time for respect, and without orders, they couldn't stop to bury anyone. Still, he decided to at least offer a quiet prayer. While he was praying, something was hurled through the air and nearly struck him. It was a Highserk cavalryman. Walm readied himself and noticed the body had been thrown from deep within the forest. The soldiers braced for what was coming. The ground shook with its approach. It was a rampaging wyvern, a dragonkin. It lunged, soared above Walm, and went straight for the soldiers. Walm ordered them to keep moving and not stop. There was no way to predict where it would strike next, but the wyvern was too fast. Before anyone could react, it devoured a soldier whole from the waist up, leaving only the lower half behind. Walm unleashed his Ignis Fatuus since tracking the wyvern by sight alone was impossible. The wyvern dove to the ground, taking the flames head-on while tearing up the earth with its landing. It whipped its tail and sent soldiers flying. Walm clicked his tongue. He couldn't use his full firepower without catching his own allies in the blast, and the wyvern's scales were dense enough to dull the effectiveness of his Ignis Fatuus anyway. He had no choice but to close the distance. Walm channeled his mana through his body to strengthen his strike and drove his halberd into the wyvern, but it barely penetrated. Only the tip sank in. The scales were so hard, the impact left his arms numb. The wyvern seized the opportunity and lunged to devour him. Walm responded by unleashing his Ignis Fatuus at maximum power directly into its gaping maw. The force of the blast shook the surrounding trees and pushed the wyvern back. Walm couldn't believe it. The same firepower that could melt steel had only charred the wyvern's scales. The wyvern swiped at him with its claw, but Walm dodged. It must have been hurt, because now it was focusing entirely on him. But Walm had no idea what to do next. He had already given everything he had. Walm kept dodging the wyvern's attacks, but every strike shattered the ground around him. Even when he dodged perfectly, a shard of rock or debris still found him. He needed just one opening, but the wyvern gave him none, as it pressed its assault without relent. One soldier stood frozen, watching Walm fight the wyvern alone. He wanted to strangle himself. The soldier who had been devoured was a good man, yet from the bottom of his heart, he felt relieved it hadn't been him. That relief shamed him, and the shame made him furious with himself. He remembered the time Walm had assigned him as Ayane's bodyguard. He wanted to prove himself. Walm was always the one fighting harder than anyone else, while something slowly rotted inside him. The soldier fought down his fear, grabbed his spear, and hurled it with a skill-enhanced throw so powerful it pierced the wyvern's left eye, giving Walm the opening he had been waiting for. Walm gave him a nod of thanks. Another soldier used earth magic to sink the wyvern's foot into the ground, pinning it in place. Walm dropped his halberd and drew the sword Burger had given him. The wyvern wrenched itself free from the earth magic and swiped at Walm again, but Walm stepped into the attack and used the momentum of its claw to vault up onto its torso, to finish what he had failed to do before. He drove the sword deep into the wyvern's chest and began channeling his Ignis Fatuus through the blade, cooking the wyvern from the inside. The wyvern screamed in agony. Walm couldn't let it escape. He needed to kill it now. If it got away, it would slaughter Ayane, Maya, and the troops behind them, so he held on and refused to let go. The wyvern dove into the ground, trying to shake him loose, but it wasn't enough. Walm held fast and unleashed his Ignis Fatuus at maximum power, driving a massive burst of flame through the back of the wyvern, and didn't release his grip until it burned to ashes. From afar, Ayane watched anxiously as smoke rose from deep within the forest. She sat down to wait for the fight to end. Then soldiers rushed into the wagon in a panic and laid Walm's body before her. Ayane was shocked to see how badly he was injured. The soldiers explained that Walm had taken down the rampaging wyvern and never let go, not until he had burned it to death. Morris was stunned by the madness of it and immediately ordered them to remove Walm's armor. Ayane was in disbelief. Why had he done it? How could he fight to that extent even while being crushed? How could he still charge headlong into death like that? Morris quickly turned to Ayane and Maya, bowing and begging them to treat Walm. Maya began examining his internal organs and head while Ayane attended to his limbs. Walm woke up coughing, struggling to speak, and asked Ayane to heal him. She was relieved he was conscious. His ribs were shattered, his left shoulder was dislocated, his humerus was broken, and there was tissue damage throughout. She knew how to treat him. She had handled far worse. Ayane told him that the last time she had treated him, it was just as critical. Walm, barely conscious, began to reminisce. It was the time their camp had been destroyed by magic. He had been in tremendous pain, and when he came to, he found himself near death, surrounded by the corpses of his comrades. Guilt washed over Ayane, and she apologized to him. But Walm told her there was no need. It was war. He was not innocent either. He had killed and burned so many people, and he had almost killed Ayane and Maya himself, had used them as shields. Simply because they were his opponents, he had been ready to end their lives. Ayane had always thought Walm was insensitive, indifferent, a battle maniac, ruthless to the core. But she had been wrong. He was just a human, like them, with blood running through his veins. Perhaps she had always known it. During their time in Sarajevo Fortress, he had let her rinse herself with hot water every night and given them supplies. When they were attacked by assassins, Walm had gone to his superiors and begged them to let Ayane rest for the night. And now, battered and broken, he had chosen to fight the wyvern to protect them all. Maya had once told her he was only doing these things to win them over. But that wasn't it. Ayane believed Walm was a serious person, the kind who wrestled with right and wrong and faced war and killing head-on. Morris came over and told Walm to stay still, or he would make it worse. He told Ayane to concentrate on the treatment. He was sure she had a great deal on her mind right now, but she could think on it later. Hours passed. Then at last they could see it, the old castle along the Myard border, Castle Danderg. After Walm recovered, he watched from above as refugees filed into the castle, carrying their belongings and lining up for soup. There were far too many of them. With the entire Myard region being swallowed by the Great Rampage, it was natural for this many to flee. But it still made him wonder why they were settling at Danderg Castle rather than retreating further to the rear. No matter how famously sturdy the castle was, hundreds of thousands of monsters were approaching. As Walm made his way to the Brigadier General's office, he wondered if the refugees had simply come here because they believed it was safe. Entering the office, Walm introduced himself and reported that he had safely transported the person under his protection from Sarajevo Fortress. The man acknowledged him and introduced himself as Brigadier General Sigismund, the commander of the castle and its surrounding territory. Sigismund asked about what he had heard, that Walm had single-handedly taken down the wyvern. Walm denied it, saying he had support from his allies and had merely clung to the dragon and kept burning it once the opening appeared. Sigismund tried to hold back his laughter before finally roaring. Walm wondered if he had said something strange. Sigismund glanced back at the guards, as if sharing in the absurdity of what Walm had just described. He then turned serious, remarking that in the end, sending Gerald Berger had been the right move. He asked whether Gerald had remained at Sarajevo Fortress, and Walm confirmed that he had. Sigismund then ordered that Walm's squad would continue to guard the healing mages. However, Walm himself was still needed at the front lines. They were critically short-handed. He and Ayane would work together, but for today, he was to rest in his room and recover his strength. Walm cursed softly under his breath, then asked for one piece of guidance. Sigismund allowed it. Walm asked about the refugees inside the castle. It was the first time he had seen anything like it, and he was concerned they would hinder combat operations. Sigismund looked at Walm, then noticed the tension that had settled over the room and the soldiers in it. He simply told Walm that many people did not want to leave their homeland, and that for now he should not worry about it and focus on the task before him. Walm had no more questions and left, but he kept turning it over in his mind. The number of refugees inside is not a military secret. Why was it necessary to take in so many? Was it to secure volunteers or labor for fortification work? But the massive consumption of supplies would be a tremendous burden on logistics, and troops had to be allocated just to manage the flow of people. If the main monster horde reached the castle, it would be pure chaos. Then something clicked. Perhaps gathering people here was the goal itself. Maybe they were planning to use them as bait, to draw the monsters to this specific location. In the infirmary, Ayane had exhausted her magic and was wishing she had more. Walm heard this and told her that healing 10 people would already be considered excellent, but she had healed 100. Wanting more than that was probably too greedy. Maya told Walm they didn't have enough medicine or herbs and were even running short on boiled water. Walm was taken aback to see even the resilient Maya worn down. He decided to use his magic to conjure water directly into the boiling pot. Ayane was surprised that Walm can use 2 attributes. He told her his water attribute was nearly useless, at least in combat. It brought back memories of his old squad, where his comrades had often treated him like a walking water bottle. Hearing this made Ayane sad for a moment, though Walm misread it and assumed she was suffering from mana depletion fatigue. He considered calling the operation for the day, but Maya begged him that they could still continue. That changed his mind, and he simply told them not to overdo it. If they felt dizzy or nauseous, they were to rest immediately. Walm figured he didn't need to stay on high alert the entire time. With the rampage consuming everything around them, the risk of assassination was low. Morris arrived at his side, surprised to hear Walm had a water attribute. Walm offered to brew him some fruit tea later, which Morris happily accepted. He asked where Walm had gotten fruit. Walm explained that before leaving Sarajevo Fortress, he had taken some from abandoned luggage, things that couldn't be carried and had been left behind, and stored them in his magic bag. Morris teased him for having this kind of hidden side, given how serious and composed he usually seemed. During dinner, Walm faced another tribulation. Right in front of him sat a whole roasted orc head. While the other soldiers casually prepared their plates, Walm was quietly panicking. He knew there were food shortages, but he hadn't thought himself desperate enough to eat monster meat. Morris casually took a bite and remarked that it was nostalgic. Walm asked if he ate this sort of thing often. Morris replied that he had consumed plenty of poisonous insects and monsters over the years to build up his poison-resistant skill. The other soldiers were equally enthusiastic, so Walm looked to Ayane for comfort. She was also from Japan. But Ayane was eating it too, remarking on how nostalgic it tasted. It turned out that during her training, she had often dissected and eaten orc alongside her childhood friends. Completely defeated, Walm sat in silence until someone slid a plate in front of him. It was the orc's tongue and nose. They told him those were the most delicious parts. The sight disgusted Walm, and he couldn't hide it from his face. With nowhere left to retreat, he picked it up with his fork and forced himself to take a bite. He chewed, and to his surprise, it was delicious. Firm yet tender, with a satisfying elasticity and a saltiness that enhanced the flavor perfectly. He didn't want to admit it, but it was good. When he looked up, he found his companions all staring at him with wide smiles. They had been watching his expressions the whole time, amused by his first encounter with orc meat. He quickly told them to hurry up, eat, and go to sleep, which made everyone laugh before they left him alone. Seeing their smiling faces, Walm couldn't help but smile too. The next day, as Dandar Castle continued to take in refugees, Walm was assigned to the gate to oversee the intake. He inspected arrivals, assigned them to either combat or labor duty, and directed them to the field kitchen. Seeing the families among them, he couldn't help but feel guilty. They were going to be used as bait. But there was nothing he could do. As a foreign soldier, it wasn't his place to give orders, and he had no proof of his suspicions. As he was thinking this over, another large group arrived. Around 100 refugees, and they were armed. Walm stepped forward immediately, stopped them, and looked them over. Recognition hit him. They were the adventurers who had used guerrilla tactics against them before. Al, the swordsman who had faced Walm before, stepped forward and begged for help. They had fled the Great Rampage and ended up here with nowhere else to go. Walm coldly asked what had become of his Myardian pride. They had killed Highserk soldiers from behind, and now, on the brink of death, they were asking their sworn enemy for help. Al told him that things were different back then, but Myard had completely fallen. Walm told him that simply bowing his head would not be enough for forgiveness. Al asked what he had to do. Walm told him he would take his head, and that would suffice. The other adventurers reacted instantly. Some reached for their weapons. Walm asked if they were going to fight again, and added that if they didn't like the terms, they were free to leave. He was a knight and in charge of this gate. He could not accept people who feigned submission while sheltering defeated soldiers, nor adventurers who attacked from behind. Amy tried to appeal to him, but Walm was completely unmoved. Al asked if there was no other way besides offering his head. Walm told him this was what it would take to settle things. Al accepted and bowed his head. The other adventurers rushed to stop him, and one even offered his own head in Al's place. But Al stopped them, saying he was the only one who needed to die. He didn't want anyone else to fall on his behalf. Walm immediately punched Al in the face and dropped him to the ground. He told Al to stand up, then punched him again, telling him this was better than taking his head. Al said nothing and let Walm beat him. When it was done, Walm turned to the rest of the adventurers and told them to line up. He would be getting to them too, until he was satisfied. Moments later, it was over. Walm told them there would be no second chance. If they betrayed them, he would cut their tendons, sever their limbs, and throw them from the castle walls. He walked away from the bruised and battered crowd and welcomed them to Dandurg Castle. Al, struggling to get back on his feet, thanked him. 5 days after Walm and the others arrived at Dandurg Castle, the bell rang out, ordering everyone to evacuate. The main wave of the Great Rampage was coming. The soldiers hurried to their assigned positions while the refugees evacuated. When one soldier stopped and looked out, he found the horizon had turned black. His eyes went wide. It was the main horde of the Great Rampage. The archers readied their bows and waited for the monsters to come within range. When they were close enough, they loosed their arrows and cut down many, but it was not enough. The monsters drove straight for the walls, trying to bore through them. One captain called out for the mage squad to unleash volleys of fire and keep the monsters from scaling the walls, but it was impossible. They had no mages. It was already bad. But worse still was a group of trolls bearing down on the walls, carrying a massive log and preparing to use it as a battering ram. The soldiers had no choice but to keep firing their bows, but it was like throwing pebbles into the ocean. Even Al, for all his experience, couldn't help but feel hopeless. There was no stopping the rampage. Their arrows were running out, and some monsters had already begun climbing the walls. An archer cried out a warning as a massive hawk dove toward them. Al activated his body acceleration and drove his blade into the bird's eye, but it wasn't enough. The hawk still managed to snatch 2 soldiers and hurl them over the wall into the horde below. Walm told the soldiers to get down if they didn't want to get burned. He unleashed his Ignis Fatuus, and in an instant the bird monsters overhead were obliterated. Al and the soldiers stared at Walm in awe as he stood there wearing his Oni mask. Al couldn't believe it. Walm was the rumored wielder of the Ignis Fatuus. Walm stepped to the edge of the wall and looked down. The monsters were piling up corpses to build a foothold and scale the walls. He leaped down toward the horde. Al and the soldiers watched in shock. The monsters looked up at him, waiting. Before Walm even reached the ground, he unleashed his Ignis Fatuus, burning everything around him. The monsters screamed in agony and were reduced to ashes. The damage was so devastating that the Great Rampage began to pull back. Walm climbed back to the top of the wall and removed his mask. He was surprised by how much his skill had grown. He felt he could push himself to fire once more, but it seemed unnecessary. The monsters had stopped and were now wary of him. He took the moment to rest as the soldiers gathered around him with admiration. With Walm here, there might be hope for this castle after all. Al and the adventurers were no less amazed. He had never known that Ignis Fatuus could be this powerful, and he couldn't help but thank the heavens that Walm was on their side. At the barracks, Walm lay on the floor as the battle raged outside. He thought he could finally get some sleep until a soldier disturbed him, apologizing and relaying an urgent message. Sigismund was requesting his presence. Walm got up reluctantly and followed. Sigismund greeted him and asked about the front lines. Walm reported that they had managed to repel the monsters through day and night assaults, but the troops were exhausted and running critically low on arrows and throwing weapons. Their survival now depended entirely on the suppressive fire of the mage soldiers. Sigismund then asked how long Walm thought they could hold. Walm told him 2 days, 3 at most. The monsters were growing smarter, digging tunnels, building crude battering rams, desperately trying every means to breach the walls. Sigismund commended Walm's assessment and added that if the monsters managed to scale the walls, close combat would begin and casualties would skyrocket. However, their communication line to the homeland was still intact for now. While they still had a sliver of leeway, he continued, they would abandon Dandurg Castle, and halt the monster's advance in the former Konoha region. The fallback position had already been decided, and secret preparations for withdrawal were underway. Walm asked why it was being kept secret. Was it to avoid confusion? Sigismund confirmed it. At dawn the day after tomorrow, they would begin a full simultaneous retreat. This shocked Walm. Sigismund continued. In accordance with the plan, they were increasing the ratio of prisoners and volunteers assigned to the wall corridors, replacing their own soldiers with Myard troops and refugees. Walm asked directly, if the retreat was the day after tomorrow, what would happen to the Myard troops and refugees crammed inside the castle? Sigismund replied that, regrettably, those who could not move in time would barricade themselves inside and wait for the great rampage to pass. Walm told him that was no different from killing them outright. The castle gates were too narrow. Only a handful would make it through, even among the Highserk soldiers. Sigismund told Walm that he was not alone in his objections and dissatisfaction, and told him to listen carefully. Did Walm genuinely believe this battle could be won, even if they fought properly? In just 3 days, they had already suffered tremendous losses. Fighting to the last man would be a futile sacrifice. Walm couldn't help but clench his fist. So they were really going to use the refugees as bait, lure the monsters in, whittle down their numbers, and buy time with disposable pawns. As a soldier, he could understand the logic. But the bait was the majority of the Myard refugees, and their rescue was not part of the plan. Walm gritted his teeth. Sigismund added that he had heard from Berger that Walm was loyal to orders, then told him directly, this was an order. To save their own people, they were throwing another nation's people into a boiling hell of slaughter. Sigismund walked toward Walm, told him this was confidential, and placed a hand on his shoulder. If Walm was able to keep the communication lines intact, they might be able to save a small number of Myard refugees. Walm gritted his teeth and told him he would comply. Walking outside, he moved through the crowd and looked over the refugees. Some were sick, some exhausted, some starving. Most of the people he passed would be left behind at dawn, the day after tomorrow. If that happened, all of them would surely die. He saw a sick child and wanted to help, but he remembered what Hosea had told him. Help one, and more will surround you. While Walm was wrestling with himself, a commotion broke out at the top of the wall. He leaped up and dashed toward it. What he found was strange. All of the monsters were gone. Some soldiers were celebrating, convinced the monsters had retreated and that some miracle had delivered them victory. But Walm felt a chill run through him. Then one soldier noticed something. A mountain was moving. He thought he was hallucinating, but it was unmistakable. The mountain was clearly moving, and it was on fire. That was when they finally realized it was not a mountain. It was a dragon, a ruler of the ecosystem, unsighted for 150 years. Of all things, one of the 5 great dragons, the Flame Emperor dragon, was heading toward them, drawn here by the great rampage. The soldiers fell into disbelief and panic. Some wanted to retreat, others to fight it with ballistae. But Walm felt something. He screamed at everyone to get away from the wall, ordering them with everything he had, because he felt an enormous surge of magical power building. The dragon's jaw creaked open. Walm ran. Some soldiers stood frozen, staring. It was dragon breath. In an instant, the dragon unleashed a massive beam that struck the wall dead on. It was so powerful it tore straight through, erasing both the wall and every soldier standing on it. That entire section simply ceased to exist. Walm pulled himself out of the rubble and looked at what remained. The devastation was absolute. The beam hadn't stopped at the wall, it had also erased the command post. With a thunderous impact, the dragon changed direction. It was now moving toward the imperial capital of Highserk. Walm couldn't help but break down. He cursed the world, asking why it had to be like this. He thought of the squad he had lost, and now his new one. He forced himself to his feet and started searching for Ayane, Maya, and Morris. Running through the rubble, he passed refugees trapped under debris, reaching out and begging for help. He ignored them and ran toward the clinic. It hadn't been damaged. He pushed through the crowd and went inside. Opening the door, he was met by the heavy smell of death. He moved quickly through the room, searching for Ayane and silently begging the heavens for her to be there. He found her. Ayane was there, and she immediately asked if he was safe. Walm felt a wave of relief, but quickly pushed it aside and told her he had been behind the gate and survived. He would now gather every soldier still capable of moving and begin evacuating immediately. The command post was destroyed. The walls were gone. The monsters would attack again soon. Walm had no experience commanding a large group, but with Morris and the other squad leaders assisting, an escape might be possible. Walm told Ayane he would protect the escape route, but Ayane asked about the people too injured to move and about the people of Myard. Walm told her they weren't from Christ, they were only Myard refugees. Ayane told him it didn't matter what country they were from, they were people, and she wanted to save them. Walm told her not to be ridiculous. This wasn't heroism, it was suicide. He told her to obey quietly and leave. Ayane told him she didn't want to die. She was scared of swords and magic, but she still refused to abandon the people. Walm stopped. He had always been the one to abandon others, all for country and duty. All the platoon leaders were dead. Some officers might try to break away on their own, but the rank and file, the ones who knew nothing of the plan, they must be frozen in shock. They should run. A full retreat was their best option. Soldiers came to Walm asking what they should do. One reported that no one of battalion commander rank or higher had survived. The brigade was half destroyed and the chain of command was gone. Walm wanted to tell them they would retreat. Then he saw Ayane, tears running down her face, begging him to help them. Walm was conflicted. He didn't want to cling to illusions. What could one man do? Everything about this was wrong. They needed to escape. Then Walm made a decision. He told the soldier he would seal the broken section of the wall and declared to everyone around him that he didn't care if they were militia or not. They would follow him. Meanwhile, at Sarajevo Fortress, Berger found himself wondering whether he was loved by his country, the Highserk Empire. They had just received a report from Danderg. The Flame Emperor Dragon had appeared. It had torn through Danderg Fortress and was now advancing straight toward the imperial capital, leveling mountains, valleys, and everything in its path. Even a full battalion of mages would stand no chance against it. To make matters worse, monsters that had escaped from Danderg were already appearing on Sarajevo's rear. They asked Gerald what they should do. Gerald was calm. He told them to have the Jason cavalry return to the homeland and assign them to evacuating citizens. With their horses, they should be able to outrun the great rampage. One soldier asked why they had to send away their most valuable mobile forces. Gerald replied that at this point, their homeland was already lost. Even if they dismounted them and held defensive positions, they would be wasting half their potential and all of their speed. While they held back the monsters, they had to evacuate as many people as possible. If the survivors took refuge in the friendly archipelago nations among the three great powers, even the Flame Emperor Dragon would not be able to reach them all. One soldier was stunned and asked if Gerald was telling them to abandon Highserk. Gerald confirmed it. They would have to abandon their beloved Highserk, their empire. They were already dead. They would lure the monsters and buy as much time as they could, even if only moments, killing as many as possible and dying in the process. If they all fled at once, perhaps some officers and soldiers could be saved, but if they fled in disorder, more citizens would die. Their families back in the homeland would die. Relatives, lovers, acquaintances, friends, the values they held, the landscapes they knew. If those who shared these things survived, the lifeblood of Highserk would be preserved. Gerald refused to lose those things. He refused to let them all burn to ashes. He wondered if his country had ever loved him. But it didn't matter, because he loved it more than anything. It was a shame he couldn't go on living. The soldiers watched in silence as Gerald declared that this was for the fatherland, that perishing here, fading away at this post, was his final act of loyalty. May there be blessings upon the remnants of the Empire. Back at Danderg Castle, Walm gathered the platoon leaders and above, along with the squad leaders. He assigned each of them roughly 30 soldiers, and had the civilians gather anything that could be used as an obstacle. He ordered the Earth attribute users to raise earthen walls over the breach, and had the remaining mages take positions along the castle wall walkways. Another wave of monsters would come soon. They had to hold. He ordered the archers not to spare a single arrow. If the monsters broke through, the castle would fall. The battle began. Waves of monsters surged toward the earthen wall, and the soldiers met them with long spears, while the archers provided support from the rear. One wolf managed to reach the top, but a shield bearer stepped up and blocked its path. Walm moved across the line, overseeing the battle and lending support wherever soldiers were struggling. One wolf managed to sink its teeth into a soldier's arm, but Al cut its head off before Walm could intervene. Walm commended him, telling him that not killing him both times had been the right call. Al grimaced and said he appreciated the kind words. A hobgoblin broke through to the top, but Walm immediately drove his blade into its throat, while Al decapitated it. Their teamwork was seamless. Meanwhile, at the rear, Wartime Brigade Commander Justice watched the battle in disbelief, muttering about why they were still fighting instead of retreating with the others. He was conflicted about whether to join them or not. A lizardman made it to the top, but Walm cut it in two before it could do anything. There were so many monsters, but none of the truly large ones had appeared yet. At this rate, they might actually hold out. But that hope was shattered when something broke through and dropped a soldier to the ground before anyone even noticed it. It was a Dullahan. Even A-class monsters were appearing now. It pointed at Walm, demanding a duel. Walm readied his stance.